He caught her keys before they hit the floor. Just stood there, the most feared man in New York, holding a cheap plastic keychain like it was made of gold. His hand didn't move. His eyes didn't look away from her sleeping face. And in that moment, something cracked open inside a man who hadn't felt anything in years. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to our channel right now and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The notebook fell first. It slipped from Lily Carter's fingers and hit the floor with a soft, flat sound that echoed in the empty restaurant like a small apology. Then her head dropped slowly against the back of the chair, and her body gave up arguing with the exhaustion it had been fighting for the last 14 hours. She didn't mean to fall asleep. She never meant to fall asleep. She had told herself just 5 minutes. Just sit down for 5 minutes. Close your eyes, let the throbbing in your feet ease up, and then get back to the closing work. The tablecloths still needed folding. The salt shakers needed refilling. The side station had to be broken down and wiped. There was at least another hour of work left, maybe 90 minutes, and she needed every dollar of the closing shift bonus they paid at the end. But the 5 minutes swallowed her whole. Her name was Lily Carter. She was 25 years old. She had worked a breakfast shift at a diner on 48th Street starting at 6 in the morning. Taken the subway downtown, changed into her uniform in the restaurant bathroom, and clocked in for the dinner service at 4 in the afternoon. She had served 43 tables that night. She had refilled bread baskets, carried trays heavier than what her frame was built for, smiled at men who didn't look at her face, and absorbed the complaints of women who sent back dishes because the garnish wasn't centered. She had done all of that without eating a real meal because she couldn't afford to order from the kitchen, and her packed lunch, a sandwich she'd made at midnight the night before, had gone warm in her locker, and she'd given it to the prep cook who'd skipped his break to cover for her when she'd had to call the hospital about Noah. Noah, her younger brother, 17 years old, smart enough to break your heart, kind enough to break it twice. He had been running a low fever for 3 days that the doctors said was probably nothing, but wanted to monitor, which in Lily's experience meant it wasn't nothing, it just hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. The most recent bill from his pulmonologist was sitting in that notebook that had just fallen to the floor. $1,200. She had $463 in her checking account. She had already done the math 11 different times in her head during the service that night, rearranging numbers, the way you rearrange deck chairs, hoping that if she shifted things around enough, the total would change. It never changed. Her phone was on their chair beside her. The screen had gone dark. She had 3 unanswered texts from her building super about the elevator, which had been broken for 3 weeks, which meant she walked up 7 flights every night with her feet already destroyed from the shift. She had a voicemail from the collection agency handling the debt her parents had left behind. Not because they were irresponsible people, but because dying in a car accident doesn't give you time to get your affairs in order. She had a reminder from the calendar app that Noah had a follow-up appointment in 4 days that she absolutely could not miss. She was sleeping through all of it. Her chest rose and fell slowly. Her hair had come loose from the neat bun she'd pinned it into at the start of the shift. Her waitress uniform, a plain black dress pressed that morning with an iron that was losing its heat, had a small stain on the hem from a soup spill she'd handled 3 hours ago. Her shoes, the sensible black flats she'd worn every shift for the past year because she couldn't afford to replace them, were still on her feet. She looked like someone who had run out of road. She looked like someone who kept going anyway. The private elevator at the back of the restaurant opened at exactly 2:17 in the morning. Adrian Morello stepped out into the silence. He was 39 years old, though he carried himself like a man who had lived several lifetimes inside that number. He was not physically imposing in the way people expected when they heard his name. Not a mountain of muscle, not the cartoon version of dangerous. He was lean, controlled, precise in the way he moved. Dark hair with threads of silver at the temples that had arrived early and that he'd stopped noticing. His suit was the kind that didn't look expensive until you got close enough, and most people were never invited close enough. His face was the kind that gave nothing away as a default, not because he was performing blankness, but because he had genuinely trained himself over many years to feel as little as possible. He came here every night, Not to the restaurant during service. The private elevator opened to a separate level, a suite of rooms that existed above the formal dining room, technically attached to the property, but functionally his own. But he always came down to the restaurant floor itself after it emptied, had done it for years. There was something about the silence of a space that had been loud for hours that he found easier to breathe in than anything his own apartment offered. The restaurant smelled of good food and cleaned linen, and the ghost of other people's evenings. Nobody in it expected anything from him. Nobody in it was afraid of him. Nobody was performing loyalty or engineering access or running calculations about how to use whatever he said next. It was the only place in New York where Adrian Morello could stand still and not feel like the stillness itself was a target. He was halfway across the dining floor when he saw her. He stopped. His first thought was how. His second thought was who. His third thought, and this one surprised him, was not anger. He stood looking at Lily Carter sleeping in a chair at the back of the empty restaurant, and the first emotion that arrived in his chest was not irritation at an intruder, not calculation about who she worked for or what she was doing there. It was something simpler and older and more inconvenient than any of that. It was recognition. He recognized the posture of someone who had nothing left at the end of the day. He had seen it in people during some of the hardest years of his life. He had never expected to see it in himself. And then one morning about 6 years ago, he had caught his own reflection after a night that had ended badly, and had seen exactly that same emptiness in his own face, and he had decided at that point to stop looking at himself in mirrors whenever he could avoid it. He walked closer, slowly, quietly. He was a quiet man by nature. Years of operating in rooms where silence was currency had trained the noise out of him. He came to stand a few feet from her, and he looked at her face. She was young. That was the first thing. Young and tired in the specific way that only comes from sustained effort. Not from one bad night, but from 100 of them stacked on top of each other. There were fine lines at the corners of her eyes that had no business being there at 25. The kind of lines that came from squinting at bills, and squinting at bus schedules, and squinting at the future trying to calculate whether it had any margin in it. Her hands were folded in her lap, and they were a worker's hands, not damaged but honest. Real. The hands of someone who had been carrying things for a long time. And then the notebook fell. It had been resting against her thigh, and when she shifted slightly in her sleep, it went. Adrian moved without deciding to move. He caught it before it hit the floor, and in the same motion, he caught the keychain that slid from between her fingers, a cheap plastic thing, a little yellow sun, the kind that comes out of a vending machine for a quarter or gets handed out at a school fair. The kind of thing that a child chooses and an adult keeps because they can't let it go. He stood there holding both objects. The notebook had fallen open. He didn't intend to read it, but the page it opened to was dense with handwritten numbers, columns of figures, additions, and subtractions, dollar amounts with question marks beside them. Medical billing codes he recognized from his own past. The name Noah written in the margin 3 times, underlined once with so much pressure the pen had nearly gone through the paper. Adrian closed the notebook very carefully. He set it on the table beside her. He placed the keychain on top of it. He did not wake her. That was the part that surprised even him. He had come down here for silence, and there was a stranger sleeping in his silence, and the natural response, the Adrian Morello response, was to resolve the intrusion immediately. A word, a gesture, a removal. Simple, clean. But his hand stayed at his side. His mouth stayed closed. He stood there for what must have been 4 or 5 minutes, just watching a 25-year-old waitress sleep in an empty restaurant, and he did not understand what he was doing, but he did not stop doing it. He pulled a chair from the nearest table and sat down. He sat 12 feet away from her, and he watched her breathe, and he thought about things he had not thought about in years. He thought about his daughter. Her name had been Sophia. She had been 4 years old. She had liked yellow specifically. Yellow plates, yellow socks, yellow crayons above all others. When she drew pictures of the sun, she pressed so hard the crayon went through the paper. He still had one of those pictures somewhere. He had never decided to keep it. He had simply been unable to throw it away. Sophia had been gone for 6 years. She had died in the kind of accident that has no meaning and no lesson and no redemption arc. The kind that just happens to children who are 4 years old and like the color yellow. She had been with her mother. Her mother, Carla, had survived physically and then had not survived the other way, the interior way, and had left 2 years after that for a place Adrian didn't know and had stopped trying to find, because he understood that she was doing what she needed to do to keep breathing, and he was not going to be the reason she stopped. After Sophia, Adrian had made a decision. Not a conscious decision with words and a resolution behind it. Just a closing. A door that swung shut on the part of him that was capable of being undone by the world. He had become very good at his work. He had become very efficient at managing an empire that required him to be many things, but vulnerable was not one of them. He had become the version of Adrian Morello that people wrote about in whispers. He had not in 6 years sat quietly watching a stranger sleep and felt anything at all. And yet, here he was. When Lily's eyes opened, they went immediately wide. It was the specific panic of someone who does not know where they are for half a second, and then knows exactly where they are, and realizes that something has gone wrong. She sat up fast. Her hand went to the table beside her, felt the notebook and the keychain still there, and the tension in her shoulders dropped 2 degrees. Then she saw him. She went completely still. "I'm sorry." The words came out automatically, the trained reflex of someone who has spent years apologizing for taking up space. "I didn't know anyone was still here. I only meant to sit down for a minute. She started to rise. "Sit down." His voice was quiet. Not a command exactly, but not a suggestion either. The kind of voice that had never needed to be loud. She sat. Not because she was afraid of him, or not only because of that, but because there was something in how he said it that wasn't hostile. She looked at him. Really looked. Tried to read him the way she'd learned to read difficult tables during a service, quickly, intuitively, without the benefit of information. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't categorize. Not predatory, not annoyed. Not the look of a man who was about to say something that would make her feel small. Something more complicated than any of those things. "You work too much," he said. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "You work too much." He said it again the same way, not defensively, just as a statement of observation. "You've been here since 4. You worked somewhere else before that. You haven't eaten a real meal." The alarm that moved through her was fast and sharp. "How do you know that?" "Because I notice things." "You notice things about me specifically." It wasn't a question. Her voice had gone careful in the way voices go careful when something feels wrong. "Who are you?" He looked at her for a moment. "Adrian." The last name didn't follow, and she didn't get one. Just Adrian. As if that was sufficient. As if the name itself should close the topic. "Do you own this restaurant?" she asked. "I have an interest in the property." Which was not an answer. She recognized non-answers. She'd been given enough of them by enough people in positions above hers. "I should go," she said. "I'm sorry for—" "You apologize too much." She stopped. "What?" "You've apologized twice in 4 minutes. Neither time was necessary." She stared at him. "You're sitting in a restaurant in the middle of the night watching me sleep. I'm the one being strange right now." Something shifted in his face. Not a smile exactly, but the territory adjacent to one. The territory a smile might consider visiting someday. "Fair point," he said. She picked up her notebook, picked up the keychain. She saw that both had been moved, placed more carefully than they'd fallen, and she looked at him and understood that he had caught them, had held them, had chosen not to wake her. The understanding did something complicated to her chest. "Go home," he said. "Sleep properly, not here. I have closing work to finish. I'll have it covered." "You can't just—" "Go home," he said again. The same quiet. The same quality that wasn't loudness, but was somehow more present than loud. She looked at him for a long moment. She was too tired to argue. She was too tired to be appropriately suspicious. She picked up her bag from under the chair, and she walked toward the service exit at the back. And she stopped once and looked back at him. And he was still sitting there in the dark of the empty restaurant, watching her leave with an expression she would spend the next 3 days trying to name. She never could. She went home. He stayed. He sat in the silence she had left behind, and he thought about a yellow plastic keychain, and about the handwriting in a notebook, and about a name written in the margin 3 times. And for the first time in a very long time, Adrian Morello did not know what he was going to do next. Bye. The next morning, Lily told herself it was nothing. She told herself this with the confidence of someone who has learned that hoping for things is expensive, and she had very little budget for expensive. She told herself that she had fallen asleep in the wrong place at the wrong time, that a man who turned out to be some kind of part owner had found her there and been moderately decent about it, and that was the end of the story. Things like that didn't lead anywhere. She was a waitress. He was whatever he was. The world didn't work the way it would have to work for that encounter to mean something. She made Noah breakfast before he woke up, left it covered on the stove, changed into her diner uniform, and got on the subway. She spent the breakfast shift at the diner, working so mechanically she could have done it in her sleep, which might have been the case, given that she'd gotten home at nearly 3 and been back up at 5:30. She refilled coffee. She ran toast. She smiled at the regulars and listened to the man at table 4 complain about the government the way he did every morning. And she said the things you say to a regular who complains about the government, which is to make the sounds of listening without committing to any position. She was thinking about Noah. His fever had broken the night before, which was good, but the follow-up appointment was still there. The bill was still there. She had worked out a calculation in the back of her head that involved picking up an extra shift on Saturday if Maria would swap with her, which Maria might not do, because Maria had her own complications, and also working a private event on Sunday that the catering company had offered, but she hadn't confirmed yet because private events meant tips, and tips were unguaranteed, and she needed guaranteed right now. She was carrying all of this the way she carried it every day, which was methodically and without complaint, and with a stillness that her coworkers sometimes mistook for being cold. She wasn't cold. She had simply learned that falling apart was a luxury she couldn't afford, and so she didn't do it. She was in the middle of this mid-calculation, mid-breakfast rush when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Text message. Your brother's appointment Thursday. Dr. Reyes moved to a better facility. The address is updated in the hospital system. No action needed on your part. She stared at the screen. She read it 3 times. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't know who had sent it. She thought immediately of Adrian, but that was absurd, wasn't it? He didn't know her brother's name. He didn't know about the appointment. She'd been asleep when he was in the restaurant. He couldn't have seen enough from the notebook to... the notebook. She thought about the notebook lying open on the table. The page with the billing codes and the appointment reminders, and the name Noah written in the margin. She put the phone in her apron pocket and kept working. That evening on the subway back to the restaurant for the dinner shift, she checked the hospital portal on her phone. The appointment was indeed updated. Dr. Reyes had been moved to a facility on the Upper East Side, a facility that when she looked it up was significantly better than the community health center she'd been taking Noah to. The copay listed was the same. No explanation for the change. She stood in the subway car and felt a feeling she couldn't immediately identify, and after a minute she identified it fury. Not gratitude, fury, because someone had accessed her private information, had made changes to her medical accounts, had done something for her without asking her whether she wanted it done. And it didn't matter how benevolent the intention was, she had not consented to being managed. She had not asked for someone to swoop in and fix things without a conversation. She had enough people in her life who thought that being in a position of power over her situation gave them the right to make decisions for her, and she was absolutely done with it. She knew who had done this. She didn't know how she knew, but she knew. She showed up to the restaurant that evening and worked her shift. She smiled at the right times. She did everything correctly. She was waiting. At the end of the night, the restaurant manager Donnelly, a wide man in his 50s, who had the specific energy of someone who considered his position more important than it was, pulled her aside before she could finish. Carter. He had the habit of calling women by their last names because he'd seen men in authority do it and thought it conveyed something. Mr. Donnelly? You closed late last night. I fell asleep. It won't happen again. No, it won't? He was looking at her in a way she didn't like. I've been told you've been asking other staff about the tip reconciliation. She hadn't been, but she'd been thinking about asking because something had been wrong with her tip-outs for the past month and she'd been doing the math. She said nothing. The reconciliation process is management's responsibility, Donnelly said. Workers don't need to be involved in the numbers. I just want to make sure my totals are right. Your totals are right. They were not right. She had been keeping her own count. If there's a discrepancy, she said, keeping her voice even, I'd like to understand where it's coming from. Donnelly looked at her with the look of a man who has been petty his entire career and has gotten good at it. You've been here 3 months, Carter. 3 months. I'd be careful about which conversations you decide to start. I'm not starting a conversation, she said. I'm asking for what I earned. You're asking for trouble. He said it pleasantly, which was the worst way to say it. Go home. She went home. But her hands were shaking on the subway, not from fear, from something colder and harder than fear, from the specific anger of a person who knows they are right and knows that being right doesn't always matter. She was still shaking when she got to her apartment building and discovered that the elevator was working. The elevator that had been broken for 3 weeks. The elevator that her super had told her would take another month to repair because the part had to be ordered. The elevator that she had climbed 7 flights of stairs past every night with her feet ruined from the shift. It was working. She stood in the lobby and looked at it. She did not take it. She walked up the stairs with the knowledge that someone had done this, and that it was the same someone, and that she had feelings about it that were not simple. She fed Noah. She made sure he took his medication. She sat across from him at their small kitchen table and watched him tell her about a math problem he'd figured out that day. Something with proofs. Something elegant and logical and beyond her completely. And she watched his face while he talked, and she thought, this is the thing. This is the one thing. Everything else is noise. This is why. After he went to bed, she sat at the kitchen table and she wrote a number in her notebook. The tip discrepancy total she had calculated over the past month. $47 per shift, 11 shifts. $517. $517 that should have been hers. She circled the number. She was going to get it back. 2 days later, Lily was working a lunch service when she saw him. Not at a table. Adrian wasn't seated in the restaurant with the other guests. He was standing near the service entrance, speaking quietly with the floor manager, and the floor manager was nodding with the specific quality of nodding that means the person being spoken to is not going to contradict anything being said. Lily watched this from across the room and felt the particular sensation of understanding more than you want to. She waited. He saw her watching. He didn't react visibly. He finished the conversation and moved toward the door, and she tracked it in her peripheral vision. And at the end of the service, when her tables had been cleared and her side work was done, she found him in the narrow corridor by the coat check. I need to talk to you, she said. I expected you sooner, he said, which was infuriating. She kept her voice low. Did you access my medical records? No. Then how did you know about the appointment? I didn't. I knew the name of the hospital. I know people there. I made a call. A call. She repeated the word the way you repeat something when you want the person who said it to hear how insufficient it is. You made a call about my brother, about my private medical situation, without asking me. I corrected a problem. It wasn't your problem to correct. He looked at her without apologizing. This was the most maddening thing about him she was discovering. He did not perform regret for things he had done deliberately. Your brother needs better care than he was getting. That's been corrected. Who told you he needed care? I read faces. I read notebooks that fall open when people fall asleep. She stared at him. That is... She stopped, took a breath. That is not acceptable. I don't care what your position is or who you are. You don't have the right to go into my life and move things around without asking me. I'm not a problem to be managed. I'm a person. Something happened in his face. Something that moved below the surface, brief and controlled, and then gone. You're right, he said. She hadn't expected that. You're right, he said again. I should have asked. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a moment. Because asking felt like giving you the chance to refuse. That's exactly what asking is, she said. That's the point. I know. He said it simply. Not as an apology, he still hadn't apologized, but as an acknowledgement. Something more honest than an apology. It won't happen the same way again. She looked at him for a long time. She was trying to find the angle. The thing underneath the thing. The reason a man like this, she still didn't know exactly what a man like this was, but she was beginning to form an impression, would spend time rerouting medical appointments and repairing elevators for a waitress he'd found sleeping in his restaurant. What do you want? She asked. Nothing. People always want something. Most people, he said. Not always. You expect me to believe you did all of this out of what charity? I don't expect you to believe anything, he said. I'm just telling you what's true. She studied him. The controlled face, the careful stillness, the suit that was not trying to impress anyone and therefore impressed her more than it should have. The eyes that were doing something complicated behind their surface. The elevator, she said. It needed repair. The medical appointment. It needed improvement. And the tips, she said. The ones Donnelly has been skimming from the closing staff for the past 2 months. A pause. Very small. She almost missed it. That's being addressed. Addressed how? In a way that resolves the problem. I want what was taken, she said. Not as a gift. As a correction. What was stolen from me and the other staff. I want it returned and I want to know it was returned. Is that clear? He looked at her. Yes, and I want to be asked, she said. Before anything else gets adjusted, I want to be asked. He nodded, once. The kind of nod that was a commitment. She held his gaze for another second. Then she picked up her apron from the hook by the coat check and went back into the dining room, and she spent the rest of the afternoon service working with the particular focus of a person who has said what needed saying and is now waiting to see whether it mattered. Dull. That evening, Donnelly was called into an office meeting. He came out of it 45 minutes later, looking like a man who had been told things in a quiet voice that had left no room for response. He looked at Lily across the restaurant. He looked away. 3 days after that, every member of the closing staff received an envelope from the accounting office. Inside each envelope was a calculation, meticulous dated, shift by shift, and a check. The covering note said only reconciliation adjustment, error in previous processing. Lily looked at the check. $522. $5 more than she'd calculated, which meant someone had found an additional half shift she'd miscounted. She sat with the check in her hands and felt something she wasn't prepared for. It wasn't gratitude. She had trained herself away from gratitude because gratitude toward people with power over you has a way of becoming leverage they didn't ask for, but will use. It was something more complicated. A feeling in the region of her sternum that she couldn't name cleanly. Something that acknowledged that someone had seen the wrong thing and fixed it not out of compassion for her specifically, but out of some standard she didn't fully understand yet. She deposited the check. She paid the pulmonologist's bill. She bought Noah a new textbook he'd been waiting for. She had $43 left. She was back at the beginning. But the beginning felt for the first time in months slightly different. Slightly less like a ceiling and slightly more like a floor. She was thinking about this on the roof of her apartment building, where she sometimes went at night when the apartment felt too small and the city felt too big when she heard footsteps on the roof access stairs. She turned. Adrian was standing at the door to the roof. She stared at him. "How do you know where I live?" "I know where most people live," he said, which was not reassuring as sentences go. "I'm going to need you to start being slightly less omniscient," she said. "I asked," he said. "Your super told me you came up here." "You asked my super. You said you wanted to be asked." She looked at him for a moment, and then against everything she intended, she laughed. It came out of her without permission, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't produced in long enough that it felt unfamiliar in her throat. She pressed her hand against her mouth like she was trying to catch it, and then gave up and let it go. He was watching her laugh. There was something in his face that she hadn't seen before. Not the careful blankness, not the controlled surface. Something underneath, something older and softer and more bruised that had surfaced briefly like a fish that breaks the water and then is gone. "What are you doing here?" she asked when she had recovered herself. "I wanted to see if you were all right." "Why wouldn't I be all right?" "Because you work 14 hours and climb 7 flights of stairs and spend your evenings doing arithmetic about a brother you love, and you haven't eaten a real dinner in at least a week that I'm aware of." The matter-of-fact quality of it was disarming. He didn't say it to make her feel pitied. He said it the way you report facts you have observed. "I'm fine," she said. "I know," he said. "That's the thing that concerns me." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means that most people, when they're in your situation, show it. They show the weight. They ask for help. They struggle visibly. You don't. You carry everything without showing it, and that's—" He stopped. "That's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't repair easily." She was quiet. She turned back to look at the city from the rooftop, the scatter of lights, the movement below, the sound of a city that never fully went to sleep. "Why do you care?" she asked, not accusatory, genuinely curious. He came to stand beside her, not close, a few feet of air between them. He looked out at the city, too. "My daughter liked yellow," he said. She waited. "She had a yellow plastic keychain, like yours, from a school fair." He was quiet for a moment. "I haven't thought about that in a while." She understood then that he wasn't going to say more. Not tonight. That this was as far as the door opened, and that what he had said was more than he said to almost anyone. She didn't push. They stood on the roof of her apartment building at midnight, a Mafia boss and a waitress, and they looked at the city that contained them both, and they were quiet together in a way that felt like something. Not a beginning exactly, not a promise, but an acknowledgement that two people who had both lost everything they loved could stand in the same silence without needing to explain themselves to each other. The wind came off the water. Somewhere below them, Noah was asleep at his desk with a math textbook open under his hand. And Adrian Morello, the most feared man in New York, stood beside a woman who had refused his help, demanded her money back, laughed despite herself on a rooftop, and had not once asked him for anything. He couldn't tell you when he'd last been near someone like that. He wasn't sure he ever had been. And Victor Salvatore, sitting in a car parked half a block away with a phone pressed to his ear, watched the two figures standing on the rooftop through a long lens and said very quietly to the person on the other end of the line, "She's a problem. She's changing him. We need to figure out what to do about her." The person on the other end of the line said nothing. Victor lowered the phone. He looked at the rooftop. He looked at the two figures standing in the city light. And he began to calculate. Victor put his phone away. He didn't rush. Men like Victor never rushed. Rushing was for people who hadn't learned yet that patience was the sharpest weapon available to someone willing to wait long enough to use it. He sat in the back of the car for another few minutes, watching the rooftop, watching the two figures standing in the city light, watching the particular quality of stillness between them that told him everything he needed to know. It wasn't the stillness of strangers. It wasn't even the stillness of acquaintances. It was the stillness of two people who had already begun without meaning to exist inside each other's atmosphere. The gravitational kind. the kind that didn't announce itself and didn't ask permission, and was therefore the most dangerous kind there was. Victor had known Adrian Morello for 19 years. He had watched him build an empire from a collection of inherited debts and bad alliances into something that commanded real respect in this city. He had watched Adrian lose his daughter and close himself off like a house being boarded up before a storm. He had watched the closing and privately decided that it made Adrian easier to work with. A man without attachments was a man without leverage points. A man without leverage points was a man you could maneuver around. What he was watching on that rooftop was a leverage point being created in real time. He told his driver to go. He had thinking to do. Lily came down from the roof a few minutes after Adrian left. She had watched him go the way he descended the stairs without ceremony, without any of the theatrical gravity that men with his kind of power often deployed when they were trying to impress you. He had simply said goodnight. She had said goodnight back, and he had gone. She stood alone on the roof for a little while after that, with the wind off the water and the sound of the city below, and she conducted an honest inventory of her feelings. She didn't trust him. That was the first and most important fact. She was not a person who trusted easily, and she was certainly not going to start with a man who knew where she lived before she had told him, who moved through the city like a piece of weather, who had accessed information about her life with a level of ease that should have been impossible. That elevator, the medical appointment, the envelope of cash that had appeared on the closing staff's desks as if accounting errors resolved themselves. People didn't do things like that without a reason. And yet, he had sat on a rooftop with her and talked about a yellow keychain and a daughter who liked yellow and had not explained further. And the way he had not explained further had told her more about the weight of that loss than any explanation could have. She recognized grief that had gone underground. She'd been carrying her own version of it since the night a police officer had knocked on the door of the apartment she'd been sharing with Noah and a family friend, and told them something that had made the kitchen floor feel like it was tilting. You didn't make up that kind of pain. You couldn't perform it well enough to fake it. She went inside. She checked on Noah, still asleep, textbook, still open, pencil, still in his hand, like he'd been solving a problem right up until the moment unconsciousness took him. She took the pencil gently from his fingers and closed the book and turned off his light and stood in his doorway for a moment the way she always did. He was the only reason she needed. He had always been the only reason. She went to bed. She was still thinking about yellow when she fell asleep. 3 weeks passed. In those 3 weeks, Lily's understanding of her life underwent a series of small but irreversible shifts, the way a building looks the same from the outside, while its foundation is changing. The first shift was practical. She noticed that certain things that had been stuck became unstuck. The insurance dispute about Noah's previous hospitalization, the one she'd been fighting through a phone tree for 4 months, was suddenly resolved. A letter arrived saying the claim had been approved and a check would follow. She read the letter standing in the building lobby and felt the exact same thing she'd felt holding the tip reconciliation check. Something between relief and suspicion, the two emotions that had coexisted in her chest since childhood, because they were the appropriate response to her particular life. She didn't contact Adrian about it. She waited to see what would come next. The second shift was at work. Donnelly was still the floor manager technically, but something had changed in how he moved through the restaurant. He was quieter, more careful. He had stopped the habit he'd had of standing too close to the female staff when he gave instructions, and he had stopped the other habit of loading the less favored servers with the worst tables while the earners got the rotations with money in them. Lily couldn't say for certain what had happened in that meeting he'd had in the back office 3 weeks ago, but the restaurant felt different, lighter. The closing staff ate dinner together now, which they'd never done before because someone nobody had mentioned who had arranged for the kitchen to leave food for them at the end of the night. Lily noticed all of it. She noticed too that Adrian was in the restaurant more often than he had been before. Not eating, not meeting with anyone, or not anyone visible. Just present in the peripheral way, the way certain things are present in a room before you consciously register them. She would see him come through the service entrance at the end of a shift. She would find a note left at the coat check that just said her name and a time, and she would go to the corridor and find him there, and they would talk for 10 or 15 minutes, and then they would go their separate ways. The conversations were not what she expected. She wasn't sure what she had expected. The version of this situation where a powerful man develops an interest in a woman who works for him had a very specific template, and she had braced herself for it. The slow maneuvering, the implied debt, the favor that turned out to cost something. None of that happened. He asked her about Noah's math. She told him Noah was working through a proof about prime numbers that he'd been stuck on for a week and had solved 2 nights ago by coming at it from a direction his teacher hadn't suggested. Adrian had listened to this with a quality of attention that surprised her genuine attention, not the performed kind, not the kind that was waiting for its turn to speak. "He sounds like someone worth knowing," Adrian said. "He's the best person I know," Lily said. And then, because she was honest, "He's the best person I've ever known. He gets it from my mother." "Your mother was mathematical. My mother was—" She thought about it. She was precise. About people. She could tell you within 5 minutes of meeting someone exactly who they were. Not what they said they were. Who they actually were. Adrian looked at her. "Where did you get that from?" "I'm still deciding," she said. He almost smiled at that one. She was starting to recognize the territory. They talked about the city, about the specific texture of New York at different hours, about the way the same street felt like a different place at 6 in the morning versus 6 in the evening. She told him about a place in the Bronx where she'd grown up that had a bodega on the corner run by a man named Mr. Espinoza, who had known her parents and who still to this day, when she went back to visit, pushed an extra piece of fruit into her bag when she wasn't looking. Adrian listened to this with the expression of someone who was cataloging something carefully. She asked him almost nothing about himself. Not because she wasn't curious. She was deeply curious. But because she understood that his information was not something he gave freely, and she was not going to perform interest in order to extract it. If he told her things, she wanted them to be the things he decided to tell her. Not the things she'd maneuvered him into revealing. He seemed to notice this. "You don't ask questions," he said one evening. "I notice things," she said. "I borrow your line. Most people want to know. Most people ask questions as a way of positioning themselves," she said. "I'd rather know who you are than know your resume." He was quiet for a moment. "Those aren't always different things." "For you, they are," she said. He looked at her with that complicated expression again, the one below the surface. "Yes," he said. "For me, they are." It was during the 4th week that the first real thing happened. Lily was working a private event, a dinner for a law firm's anniversary, the kind of event where the clients wanted everything to feel effortless, and the staff worked twice as hard to create that illusion. She was carrying a tray of champagne glasses through the main room when she heard a conversation that she was not meant to hear. 2 men near the window. Older, expensive suits. The ease of people who had never needed to apologize for the space they took up. She didn't know either of them. She passed behind them without slowing. "Morello's been quiet lately. Too quiet." "Quiet's not the same as stable. You know what I heard? He's spending time with some girl who works here." "What kind of girl?" A pause. The kind of pause that contains contempt. The waitress kind. She kept walking. She set down the champagne glasses. She did not change her expression, but her pulse had kicked up, sharp and sudden, and she spent the rest of the service tracking the information from the 2 men at the window. They were not just clients at a dinner. They were something else. Something adjacent to whatever Adrian was. And they were paying attention to him, and now apparently to her. She told him that night. She found him in the corridor after the guests had gone, and she relayed the conversation without editorializing the way she relayed information she knew was important, plainly, precisely, with all the details intact. Adrian listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Who were they? Can you describe them?" She described them. He was still for a moment. "You shouldn't have to worry about that," he said. "That's not an answer. It's a reassurance." "I don't want reassurance," she said. "I want to understand what I'm in the middle of." Because I'm apparently in the middle of something, and I'd rather know what it is than not know. He looked at her. She watched him make a decision in real time, watched him weigh something, calculate, arrive somewhere. Those men are associated with people who have had business interests that conflict with mine, he said carefully. They're not a direct threat. They're observers. Observers with opinions about my employment status. Yes. And what happens when observers become more than observers? They don't, he said. Not to people connected to me. I'm not connected to you, she said. Something in the air shifted. No, he said. You're not. But the way he said it was different from the way she had said it. She went home that night and lay on her ceiling and thought about that difference for a long time. Deb. Noah met him by accident. This was not something either Lily or Adrian had arranged. It was not something either of them would have arranged for different reasons. It happened because the world is small in the particular ways that matter, and because Adrian had developed the habit of appearing in places where Lily was and being quietly useful, and one Saturday afternoon he arrived at the hospital to deal with something administrative. A quiet word with the billing department. The kind of word that had a way of reorganizing itself into action and ran directly into Lily in the lobby, who was there with Noah for his follow-up. She saw him first. Her face did something complicated. Not quite alarm, not quite pleasure. The face of a person who has been keeping two things in separate rooms of their life and has just watched those rooms open onto each other. Adrian. He stopped. He looked at her. He looked at the young man beside her. Noah Carter was 17 and looked like the male version of his sister. Same eyes, same particular quality of attention, same default expression of thoughtful evaluation. He was taller than Lily, thin in the way of someone who had been unwell for a while, but he was looking at Adrian with exactly the kind of clear assessing intelligence that told Adrian this was not a kid you could charm or dismiss or perform for. "This is my brother," Lily said. "Noah." And then with a carefulness that Adrian noticed and understood, "This is Adrian. He, a half-beat, has an interest in the restaurant where I work." Noah looked at Adrian. Adrian looked at Noah. "You solved the prime number proof," Adrian said. Noah blinked. "Sorry. Your sister told me. The approach your teacher hadn't suggested going at it from the distribution side rather than the sequence side." A pause. "Yeah," Noah said slowly. "How did you—" "She mentioned that." "I asked about you," Adrian said simply. Noah looked at his sister. Lily was watching this with the expression of someone who has calculated 100 possible outcomes and is watching one she didn't fully account for. "Cool," Noah said with the particular guardedness of a 17-year-old deciding whether an adult is worth talking to. And then, "Most adults ask me how school is going. They don't ask about the actual math." "Most adults find math threatening," Adrian said. "Do you?" "I find anything I don't understand threatening," Adrian said, "which is why I try to understand everything." Noah was quiet for a moment. Then, "She said you own part of the restaurant. I have an interest in the property." "That's the same thing you told her," Noah said. "What does that actually mean?" Adrian looked at the 17-year-old for a long moment. The question was direct and honest and deserved a direct and honest answer. "It means I have financial stakes in several properties and businesses in this city," Adrian said. "The restaurant is one of them." "How many?" "Noah." Lily's voice was mild but final. "I'm just asking." "It's fine," Adrian said. He looked at Noah. "More than I can count without a spreadsheet. Fewer than I once planned to have." "Why fewer?" "Because at some point the number stops mattering and something else starts to matter more." Noah thought about that. "What's something else?" Adrian looked at Lily. She was looking at him. "That's a question I'm still working on," Adrian said. The hospital appointment went well. Dr. Reyes reported that Noah's pulmonary function was improving not dramatically, but measurably, and measurable improvement was the thing they'd been chasing for 2 years. He would need to continue the medication. He would need the follow-ups. But the numbers were moving in the right direction. Lily sat in the consultation room and heard this, and felt the particular sensation of holding together very carefully, because if she let herself feel the full weight of the relief, she would fall apart in a way she couldn't afford to do with Noah in the room, and a doctor watching, and everything still requiring her to function. She held together. In the lobby on the way out, Adrian was gone. She hadn't expected him to wait. He wasn't a man who waited in lobbies for people. But when she got to the subway and checked her phone, there was a message. "Good news, I hope." She looked at the message. She typed back, "How did you know?" His response, "You're walking faster." She looked up from her phone. She scanned the hospital entrance, the street, the people moving around her. Nothing. She didn't see him. She put the phone in her pocket. "Who was that?" Noah asked. "Adrian." Noah was quiet for half a block. Then, "He likes you." "Noah?" "I'm not being weird about it, Lily. I'm 17, not 7. He likes you. And you're doing that thing you do where you pretend something isn't happening because if you acknowledge it, you'll have to have a feeling about it." She looked at her brother. "When did you get so smart?" she said. "I've always been this smart," he said. "You've just been too tired to notice." She found Donnelly going through the staff tip reports 2 nights later. This was after hours. She had come back to the restaurant because she'd left her notebook in her locker. The same notebook, always the same notebook. The one that kept her life organized, and she'd come in through the service entrance and gone to the back hallway, and stopped when she heard voices from the manager's office. The door was open 2 inches. She heard Donnelly's voice. "Just adjust the totals for the last 3 weeks. Nobody's going to notice. The new accounting review isn't until March." Another voice, younger, probably the assistant manager. "But after what happened last time was different. Last time, someone was looking. Nobody's looking now." Lily stood very still in the corridor. She thought about the $517. She thought about 11 shifts. She thought about the closing staff eating dinner together, now laughing at the end of the long nights, feeling like something had gotten better. And here was Donnelly, 3 weeks later, running the same numbers again. She took out her phone. She opened the voice memo app. She pressed record. She stood in the corridor for 4 minutes and 30 seconds, and she recorded everything Donnelly said. And then she took her notebook from her locker, and she walked out of the building, and she stood on the sidewalk in the cold, and she looked at her phone, and she thought about what to do. She did not call Adrian. She thought about calling Adrian. She thought about it for almost a full minute. And then she put the phone in her pocket, and she started walking, because what she had in her hand was evidence, and evidence had legal weight, and she was going to use it the legal way, not the Adrian Morello way, whatever that way was. She went home and spent 2 hours researching labor law and tip theft statutes in New York State and worker protection mechanisms, and she found the number for the State Department of Labor's wage theft hotline, and she wrote it in her notebook, and she circled it. She did not call Adrian, but she told him the next day. She told him because she had said she wanted to be told things, and it seemed unreasonable to ask for that from someone while withholding things herself. She found him in the corridor after the lunch service, and she relayed it the same way she'd relayed the conversation at the private event, plainly, precisely all the details. He listened. When she finished, he said, "You recorded it?" "Yes." "And you're going to the Department of Labor?" "Yes." He was quiet. "You could just—" he started. "No," she said. He stopped. "No," she said again. "I know what you're going to say. You could handle it. You could make a call. You could have him removed before morning, and nothing would leave any paper behind. I know that. But I need this to go through the right channels. I need this to be documented. I need the other staff members to have something real, something with a case number and a claim and a process. Not just another envelope from accounting that nobody can point to." He looked at her. "And I need," she said more quietly, "to do something myself. You understand, not because I'm ungrateful, but because I need to know I can." He was very still. "I understand," he said. "Do you?" "More than you'd expect," he said. Bamnaman. She filed the complaint the next morning. The investigator who took her call was a tired-sounding woman named Martinez, who had clearly heard everything before and maintained a professional skepticism that Lily respected. Lily laid out the documentation. Her personal tip records the dates, the discrepancy calculations, and the audio file she had emailed to herself and saved in 3 places. Martinez listened, asked specific questions, listened more. "This is solid," Martinez said in the tone of someone who didn't give compliments easily. "It'll take some time, but this is solid." "How long?" 6 to 8 weeks for an initial review. Could be longer. 6 to 8 weeks was not nothing. She had bills due in 3 days. "All right," she said. "And Ms. Carter, don't tip the manager off. If he knows there's an investigation, he'll move the records." "He won't know from me," Lily said. She hung up the phone. She sat in the diner during her break, and she felt the specific feeling of having done the right thing, which was not comfortable and not reassuring, and did not pay any bills, but which was in the most fundamental sense the only kind of feeling she could live with. Her phone buzzed. "Adrian. Did you file?" She typed back. "Yes." "Good. Just that. Good." She looked at the word and felt something she couldn't immediately categorize, which was becoming a recurring theme with him. He kept producing feelings she didn't have pre-existing labels for. Then another message. Noah's textbook. The one he needs for the fall semester. "It's not available at the school library. There are 2 copies in the university library uptown. I've arranged access if he wants it." She stared at the message. He had asked. She typed back. "You asked. You said to ask." "I did say that. Do you want me to rescind the offer?" She smiled at the phone. She couldn't help it. "Do you want me to rescind the offer?" was possibly the most Adrian Morello sentence that had ever been constructed. "No," she typed. "Thank you." The thank you cost her something. She didn't give those easily either. He seemed to understand that because what came back was not a deflection or a minimization. "You're welcome," he wrote. That was all. She put the phone in her apron and went back to work. The thing nobody had warned her about, or maybe the thing she should have known, but hadn't let herself know, was the particular loneliness of being seen. She had been invisible for so long in so many specific and practical ways that the infrastructure of her daily life was built around it. She moved efficiently because nobody was watching her move. She made decisions quickly because nobody was going to second-guess them. She felt her feelings privately and processed them alone, and carried her grief about her parents in a room in her interior that she had locked from the outside so that it couldn't open unexpectedly. And then here was this man watching. Not intrusively, not in the way of surveillance or possession or the male gaze that had followed her through every service job she'd ever had. In the way of genuine attention. The way of someone who noticed the notebook and understood what the numbers in it meant and didn't announce that understanding, but also didn't pretend it away. She was not used to being understood. She was not prepared for how much harder it was to maintain her composure when someone actually saw her than it had been when no one did. She was thinking about this on a Tuesday night on her way home from a double shift, so tired that the subway car felt like it was moving through something thicker than air when she got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered, "Miss Carter." The voice was male, older, precise, in the particular way of someone who had arranged the precision intentionally. "My name is Victor Salvatore. I believe you know someone we have in common." Everything in her went still. "I don't know you," she said. "No," he said. "But I know you rather well. I know about your brother. I know about the Department of Labor complaint you filed this morning. I know about the university library access that was arranged this afternoon." A pause. "I know that you've been spending time with Adrian Morello in ways that are beginning to attract attention." She said nothing. "I'm not calling to threaten you," Victor said. and he said it in exactly the tone of a man who was calling to threaten her. "I'm calling because I think someone should be honest with you about what you've walked into." "I haven't walked into anything." "No," he said. "You're right. You were carried into it, by a man who doesn't understand what he's doing to you, by being near you." Another pause. "Adrian Morello is not a simple man, Miss Carter, and the people around him are not simple people. What happens to the people who get close to him, the ones he cares about, you should ask him about that sometime." "What does that mean?" "It means that caring about Adrian Morello has a cost," Victor said. "It's a cost that's already been paid by people who had less warning than you're getting right now." The line went quiet. She was standing on the subway platform. People were moving around her. The train was coming. "What do you want?" she said. "I want you to think very carefully," Victor said, "about whether the things you're gaining are worth the things you're about to lose." A pause. "That's all. Think carefully. Good night, Miss Carter." The line went dead. The train arrived. She got on. She stood holding the pole in the lurching car, the city passing in dark windows, and she thought about what he'd said. Not the implied threat. She had clocked the implied threat immediately and had filed it. But the other part. What happens to the people who get close to him? The ones he cares about. The cost that's already been paid. She thought about Sophia. She thought about a yellow keychain. She thought about a man who had closed a door on himself 6 years ago, and what it meant that the door was beginning to open again, and what it meant that someone in his world had noticed, and what it meant that that someone had gone to the trouble of finding her number. She got home. Noah was awake doing math at the kitchen table. She sat across from him. She didn't tell him about the call. She watched him work for a while, the way his pencil moved, the slight frown he got when something wasn't resolving the way he expected, the small sound of satisfaction when it did. She thought, "I am not walking away from anything." She thought, "But I need to know what I'm walking toward." She picked up her phone. She called Adrian. He answered on the second ring. "Someone named Victor Salvatore called me tonight," she said. Silence. The kind of silence that has texture. "He knows about the lab complaint," she said. "He knows about Noah's library access. He knew things he should not have been able to know." She paused. "He told me that being near you has a cost, that people who get close to you pay it." Another pause. "I want to know what he meant." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a long moment. "Victor," Adrian said finally, and the single word contained something she hadn't heard in his voice before. Not fear. Something older than fear. Something that had already survived being afraid and had come out the other side. "Who is he?" she asked. "He's been beside me for 19 years, Adrian said. "He knows everything, every decision I've made, every person I've been close to, every—" He stopped, started again. "Victor was there when Sophia died." She waited. "He was there when Carla left," Adrian said. "He was there through every year after that." His voice was precise and controlled the way things are controlled when they're containing a great deal of pressure. "He has never once in 19 years called someone I know to warn them about me." "Then why now?" She heard him breathe. "Because he's never had reason to before," Adrian said. "Because he's never—" He stopped again, started again differently. "I think he's scared. Of me. Of what you represent." The quality in his voice shifted. "Of what happens to me when I'm near you." She sat at the kitchen table across from her brother, who was doing math, and didn't know that his sister's life was quietly rearranging itself around a man she hadn't known 4 weeks ago. "What does happen to you?" she asked. A long pause. "I remember things," Adrian said quietly. "Things I decided not to remember anymore. I feel things I closed off. I find myself thinking about the future in ways I stopped doing a long time ago." Another pause. "For Victor, that's a problem. Because a man who feels things is a man who can be reached. And a man who can be reached is a man who can be broken." "And can you," she said, "be broken?" "Everyone can be broken," he said. That's not what I asked. Silence again. Then, not the way I used to be. No. Something's different now. He said the last sentence in a way that suggested he was still arriving at its meaning as he spoke it. She looked at her brother. She thought about $517 and an elevator and a doctor on the Upper East Side and a library pass and a man who caught a keychain before it hit the floor and held it like it was something precious. Victor is going to be a problem, she said. Yes, what are you going to do about it? I don't know yet, he said. And the fact that he said I don't know, the fact that he said it to her honestly, without performing certainty he didn't have, did something to her that she had not anticipated. When you figure it out, she said, tell me. Why? Because you've been doing things by yourself for 6 years, she said. And you're not doing this by yourself. The silence that followed was different from the other silences. It was the silence of something shifting. Something fundamental and irreversible and more frightening than anything Victor Salvatore could arrange. Get some sleep, he said finally. His voice had changed. Something in it was warmer and more unguarded and more real than anything she'd heard from him before. You too, she said. She hung up. Noah looked up from his math. He looked at her face. Lily, he said. I'm fine. She said. I know, he said. You look fine. That's not what I mean. He set his pencil down. I mean, are you okay? Like, actually okay? She looked at her brother, 17 years old, smarter than she deserved. I don't know yet, she said honestly. He nodded like that was a complete answer, like that was enough. He picked up his pencil and went back to the math. And somewhere across the city, Victor Salvatore sat in an office that smelled of good wood and old money, and made a series of phone calls to people whose names Lily Carter would never know. And in each call, he said the same thing in slightly different arrangements of words. And the thing he was saying was this: the waitress has to go. Not permanently, not violently, but away, removed from the picture, made to disappear from Adrian's sight before whatever was happening between them became something that could not be undone. He was very calm about it. He had been patient for 19 years. He could be patient a little longer. Victor didn't move fast. That was the thing about him that made him dangerous in ways that louder men were not. He moved the way water moves through stone, not by force, not by impact, but by persistence. By finding the hairline cracks and settling into them and waiting for time to do the work. He had identified 3 cracks already. The first was Donnelly. The floor manager was already compromised. The Department of Labor investigation Lily had filed meant there was a paper trail, and a paper trail meant exposure, and exposure meant Donnelly would do whatever he was told if whoever was telling him could make the exposure go away. Victor had made that call 2 days after Lily filed the complaint. Donnelly had listened. Donnelly had agreed to things Victor asked for without being told why, which was the preferred arrangement. The second crack was Lily's building. Not the elevator that was Adrian's territory now, and Victor wasn't going to touch it directly. But the lease. The landlord. A quiet word from the right person to the right person about code violations that might need to be inspected, about permits that might need to be reviewed, about administrative complications that had a way of producing eviction proceedings if left unaddressed. Nothing violent, nothing traceable, just friction, just the specific grinding sound of a life becoming harder by increments. The third crack was Noah. Victor didn't plan to harm Noah. He wasn't that kind of man, or rather he told himself he wasn't that kind of man, which was a different thing. But Noah's medical situation was a pressure point. The access to the better facility, the insurance approval, the improved care, all of it was connected to Adrian, and anything connected to Adrian could be reconnected or disconnected by someone who understood how those connections worked. Victor understood how they worked. He began quietly and methodically to pull threads. Lily noticed the first thing on a Thursday. She was coming out of the diner after the breakfast shift when she ran into her landlord in the lobby of her building. This was unusual. Her landlord was a man named Bresner, who communicated exclusively through his management company, and had spoken to Lily directly maybe twice in the 2 years she'd lived there. He was standing in the lobby, looking at something on his phone, and when he saw her, his expression shifted in a way she had learned to recognize the expression of a person who has been told something about you and is deciding how to play it. "Ms. Carter," he said. "Mr. Bresner." She stopped. "Is something wrong?" "I've been notified of some concerns about your unit," he said. "There may need to be an inspection." "What kind of concerns?" "Structural. Maintenance-related." He looked at his phone rather than at her. "It could take some time to process. You might want to think about your options." She looked at him steadily. "My lease is current. My rent is paid 3 days early every month." "I understand. Then I don't understand what options you're suggesting I think about." He shifted. "These things can be complicated. I just wanted to give you advance notice." She kept her voice even. "I appreciate the notice," she said. "Please send me anything official in writing to the email address on my lease." She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed and she thought very carefully. It was possible this was coincidental. Buildings had real maintenance issues. Inspections happened. But she had called Adrian the night before and told him about Victor's call and something in the timing of this Bresner appearing the next morning, with the expression of a man who'd been spoken to, made coincidence feel like an answer that wasn't doing enough work. She called Adrian. "My landlord just told me there might be an inspection," she said when he picked up. "Structural concerns." He was vague about it. A pause. "Bresner. You know my landlord?" "I know of him. He manages several properties in that area." Another pause shorter. "This is Victor." "I assumed." "Lily. I'm not afraid of him," she said. And she meant it, which was perhaps the thing that should have concerned her most. She had learned that fear was information. Fear was the body's way of telling you that a threat assessment had come back positive. The fact that her body was not producing fear right now was not because the threat wasn't real. It was because the anger was louder. "You should be careful," Adrian said. "Victor doesn't move directly. He moves around things, creates conditions. I know what he's doing," she said. "He's applying pressure at the edges, making my life harder in small ways that are individually deniable." She paused. "What I want to know is why now. We've been careful. We haven't been—" She stopped, started again. "It's been a few weeks. We've kept things quiet. What changed?" "He saw us on the roof," Adrian said. 3 weeks ago. He was watching." She absorbed this. "He had someone watching you." "He's had people watching me for years. I've known about it. It's an arrangement that exists for security reasons." He paused. "I didn't expect him to turn it into something else." "But you knew it was possible." A silence. "Adrian." "Yes," he said. "I knew it was possible." She sat with that for a moment. The specific weight of knowing that someone had been aware of a risk and had not communicated it. "You should have told me," she said. "I know. That's not saying I know isn't enough. If I'm going to be in this, whatever this is, I need to actually be in it. Not handed the parts you decide are safe for me to have." "You're right," he said. "Stop agreeing with me and tell me something real." She heard him breathe. Heard the shift that she had come to recognize, the one that meant he was dropping something. "Victor has been my closest advisor for 19 years, he said. "In that time, he has run operations, managed relationships, handled situations that needed handling. He knows every piece of what I've built. He knows where everything is vulnerable. He's been waiting for me to make a mistake he can use. He's waiting to take over." "He's been waiting," Adrian said, "since about a year after Sophia died, when he decided I was diminished. When he decided that grief had made me a liability instead of an asset, and that the whole structure would be better served by a different person at the center of it." She was quiet. "He hasn't moved directly because he's not certain," Adrian said. "He needs me to make a mistake large enough to justify it, something the people around us would recognize as disqualifying." A pause. He thinks you're that mistake. Does he? He thinks that I'm making decisions around you that I wouldn't have made otherwise, that my judgment is compromised. And is it? A pause long enough that she felt it in her chest. Yes, Adrian said, but not in the way he means. She closed her eyes. She pressed her hand against her sternum, where that unnameable feeling had taken up permanent residence since about the second week she'd known him. What are you going to do about him? She asked. I'm working on it. What does working on it mean? It means I'm building something before he does, Adrian said. Documentation. Proof. Things that establish who he is and what he's been doing underneath the surface of what I can see. His voice was precise and controlled, and underneath the control was something that ran very deep. He has access to things that are mine, that concern me, that concern people that concern people in my life. If he decides to move those things, I need to be ahead of it. How long do you need? 2 weeks, maybe 3. She thought about Bresner. She thought about the lease. She thought about Noah asleep at his desk with a math book and no idea that the scaffolding of his sister's life was being tested from the outside. All right, she said. 2 weeks. But Adrian, yes. Don't protect me from information again. I won't, he said. And then more quietly, I'm sorry. She hadn't expected the apology. He didn't give them easily. She knew that now. When it came without ceremony or performance, just 3 words that meant he understood what he'd done and wasn't going to argue about it. Get some sleep, she said. I'll try, he said, which was the most honest thing he'd said on that subject. She didn't sleep well that night. She lay in the dark, and she thought about what Victor had said. What happens to the people who get close to him? And she thought about it with more clarity than she'd allowed herself to that first night on the subway. Because she had been spending these weeks in a careful negotiation with herself. One where she acknowledged the reality of Adrian in one column and kept herself at a safe distance in another column, and the walls between those columns were getting harder to maintain. She was not a romantic person. She had not had the luxury of being romantic. Romance in her experience was the story you told about something while you were in it, and the truth of it only became clear from the outside, which meant you were always slightly behind. She had watched her parents love each other with the specific devotion of 2 people who had decided that the other person was worth organizing their life around, and she had thought for a long time that this was the model she would eventually find. But then her parents had died, and she had understood something. The cost of loving someone that way was that when they were gone, the whole structure of your days was suddenly without its organizing principle. She had not wanted to be reorganized. She had wanted to remain herself, intact, continuous. And yet, she thought about a man who caught keychains before they hit the floor, who asked to be told things, who said I'm sorry without qualifying it, who sat on a rooftop talking about a daughter who liked yellow and hadn't explained further because the further wasn't available yet, not because he was withholding, but because he was still excavating it himself. She thought I am already past the point where walking away is simple. She had probably been past it for 2 weeks. She turned over and stared at the ceiling and understood with the clarity of someone who has finally let themselves know something they've been not knowing for a while, that she was going to get hurt if this went wrong. That the kind of hurt it would be was not the kind she had experienced before. Not the exhausted despair of poverty or grief or the grinding friction of a life without enough margin, but the specific interior kind that came from having let someone into the room you'd locked from the outside. She had let him into the room. She didn't know when exactly. Maybe the night on the roof. Maybe the moment he said I'm sorry without performance. Maybe earlier. Maybe the second night when he'd said you apologized too much and she'd felt something shift without her permission. She turned her face into the pillow and she stayed there for a minute. Then she got up and went to check on Noah. He was asleep. He was breathing. His math book was closed on the nightstand and his pencil was on the floor, and he had the particular peaceful expression of a person whose mind was even in sleep, doing something complicated and productive. She picked up the pencil. She set it on the nightstand. She went back to bed. The next morning brought the second thing. She was at the diner when Maria, who worked the counter, came in 20 minutes late with the compressed expression of someone who had been crying recently and was now performing normalcy over the top of it. Lily let it go until the rush was over. Then she found Maria in the back and said, "What happened?" Not a question, a statement. The way you say things to someone when you already know something happened and you're giving them the opening. Maria sat down. She was in her 30s, a single mother, the kind of woman who had been taking care of people her whole life, and had developed the habit of not asking for the same in return. "The guy from the agency called again," Maria said. "Which agency?" "The debt one. The one that's been—" She pressed her lips together. "They told me they'd been contacted by someone about my account, that the debt had been sold to a new collector, that the terms were—" She shook her head. "The new terms are worse, a lot worse. And the deadline is next week." Lily went still. "Who contacted them?" she asked. "I don't know. They wouldn't say." Maria looked at her hands. "I was almost done. I was 8 months away from being done with it, and now—" She stopped. "It's like someone reset it." Lily put her hand on Maria's arm. "She said the things you say. She meant them." But her mind was already elsewhere, already tracking the shape of what she was seeing. Donnelly, Bresner, Maria. Victor wasn't just applying pressure to Lily. He was reaching out through her, finding the people around her, the people whose faces he'd learned by watching through a long lens from a car, and pressing on those lives too, making the radius of damage wider. Creating a situation where Lily's continued presence in this world wasn't just a problem for Lily, but a problem for everyone near her, making her an expensive friend to have. She went through the rest of the shift with a particular coldness in her chest that was not fear and not anger, but something more focused than either. She called Adrian on her break. "He's going after people around me," she said, "not just me. A co-worker at the diner. Her debt situation just got significantly worse overnight. Someone restructured her accounts." A silence on the other end. "Victor is building a perimeter," Adrian said. "He's making me a liability, making it so that anyone near me starts paying a cost." She paused. "It's effective. I'll give him that. It's effective because it means I can't just decide to handle the risk to myself. I have to think about the risk to other people." "That's what he's counting on," Adrian said. "How close are you to having what you need?" "A week, maybe 10 days. He's going to move before then." "I know. Adrian," she kept her voice even. "Tell me honestly, is there anything he can do that you can't come back from?" A pause. "Not to me directly," he said. "What does not directly mean? It means the things I'm most concerned about are not about me." She understood what he meant. She had understood it before he said it, which was perhaps the reason her voice, when she spoke again, came out slightly rougher than she intended. "He's not going to touch Noah," she said. "No," Adrian said. "He's not." "That's not an assurance. That's a statement of intent. How are you going to make it a fact?" "I already have people on it," Adrian said. "Since 2 days ago, I should have told you." "You should have told me." "I know." "Adrian." She stopped, pressed the phone harder against her ear. "You keep learning this lesson one incident at a time." "I know," he said. "And then, I'm not accustomed to having someone to tell." That stopped her. She stood on the sidewalk outside the diner with the noise of the street around her, and she thought about a man who had spent 6 years sealed inside himself, managing an empire alone, making decisions alone, taking on risks alone, and how the habit of solitude was not something you unlearned quickly, even when you wanted to. "Get accustomed," she said, "because I'm not going anywhere." The silence on the other end had a quality she couldn't describe, something like being steadied. "Okay," he said. That evening, Donnelly called her into his office. She had been expecting something from him. Victor had too many pieces in motion for Donnelly not to be one of them, but she hadn't expected it this quickly. She went in. She stood. She did not sit down, which was a choice she made deliberately because sitting down in someone else's office at their invitation was a particular kind of territorial concession she wasn't prepared to make. Donnelly was behind the desk. He looked like he'd had a difficult week, which he had most of it deserved. He had the expression of a man who had been given instructions and was now delivering them, and was trying to dress it up as something other than what it was. "Carter," he said, "I wanted to let you know that we're looking at restructuring the closing team." "What does that mean?" "It means some roles may be affected, schedules shifts." He gestured vaguely. "The restaurant is evaluating staffing needs." "Am I being taken off closing?" "We're still determining. Am I being let go?" He shifted. "Nothing's been decided yet." "Then why are we having this conversation?" "I'm giving you advance notice." "Of what specifically?" He looked at his hands. "Of the possibility of changes." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the audio recording she still had on her phone. She thought about the Department of Labor investigator named Martinez, who had said this is solid in the tone of someone who didn't say that often. "Mr. Donnelly," she said, "I want to be clear about something. Whatever conversation you've had, and with whoever you've had, that conversation is going to matter a lot less than the documentation I filed 2 weeks ago. That documentation has a case number. It has a process. It has a person assigned to it who is going to be very interested if the person who filed it suddenly has employment complications." She paused. "I'm not threatening you. I'm informing you. There's a difference." His jaw tightened. "You want to be careful, Carter." "I am careful," she said. "I'm also thorough. Is there anything else?" He didn't say anything. She left the office. Her heart was going fast in her chest. Not from fear, she was past fear now, had moved through it into something harder, but from the adrenaline of having said a thing she wasn't certain she could back up, and having said it anyway, because backing down was not something she was built for, and she'd stopped pretending otherwise. Sometime around the age of 17, when she'd realized that she was the only parent her brother had. She got through the shift. She texted Adrian Donnelly. "Warned me about possible employment changes. I think Victor is going to try to get me fired." The response came back in under 2 minutes. "It won't land. I'll handle it." She stared at the text. Then she typed, "I told you." His response was already coming. "I mean, I'll handle it on the legal and documentation side. Your position is protected. Martinez's investigation creates a retaliatory firing presumption. I had a labor attorney confirm it this morning." She exhaled. "You had a labor attorney confirm it. I said I was working on it." She sat with that for a moment. He was working on it. He had been working on it. He had thought about the chessboard from her position and anticipated what Victor would use and had addressed it before she'd even known it was coming. She typed, "Next time tell me before, not after." "Yes," he wrote back. She was beginning to understand that yes was his version of a promise. He didn't say, "I promise," didn't say, "I swear," didn't produce any of the performative assurances that people offered when they were not particularly serious about what they were saying. He said yes, plainly, and then he did the thing. She was finding more reliable than most promises she'd been given. 5 days passed. In those 5 days, Lily continued to work her shifts and say nothing, and watch the edges of her life for more pressure, and find it in small ways a question from her building's management company about a pet she didn't have, which was a pretext for an inspection she didn't want. A message from the hospital billing department saying they needed to verify her insurance information, which when she called, turned out to be a request that had originated from somewhere she couldn't trace, and that the billing department was confused about themselves. A conversation at the diner where the owner, a man named Hector, who was not unkind, but who was also not able to afford complications, mentioned that someone had been asking about her, some man who'd come in and asked questions about her schedule and her reliability. Each incident was small. Each incident was deniable. Together they formed a pattern as clear as a signature. She documented every one. Dates, times, descriptions, any names she could get. She sent the documentation to herself and to a cloud account she'd created specifically for this purpose, and she kept a physical copy in the notebook. On the fifth day, something different happened. She was on the subway home from the dinner shift when she became aware of a man. She didn't know when she'd first noticed him. She had the particular peripheral alertness that develops in a woman who has spent years navigating a city alone at night, the background awareness that never fully shuts off. She noticed him somewhere around the third stop. He was average in every visible way, average height, average clothing. Nothing that would catch your eye, which was, she understood the point. He wasn't close. He wasn't doing anything threatening. He was reading his phone, but he got off at her stop. She walked up the stairs and turned left toward her building, and she didn't look back, but she heard him behind her. Not close. Half a block. She stopped at the bodega on the corner. She went in. She bought a bottle of water and she stood at the counter paying for it for longer than she needed to, and when she came out, she didn't see him anywhere. She walked home. She got inside and she locked the door and she stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she called Adrian. She told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. "Don't go out alone after 10, he said. "Not until this is resolved. I work until midnight. I'll arrange transportation. Adrian, please." The word came out differently than his other words, stripped of the usual control, just the word itself unguarded, asking something. "Please, for the next 10 days. She stood in her hallway. "For the next 10 days, she said. She heard him breathe. "Thank you," he said. It was on the 7th day that the first major thing broke open. Lily was not expecting the call. She was at the diner mid-breakfast rush when her phone buzzed and she glanced at it and saw Noah's school number and felt the specific cold rush that a parent or a sibling feels when a number they associate with safety calls at an unexpected time. She stepped out. "Ms. Carter." A woman's voice, calm and professional. "The school counselor. I'm calling because Noah came to see me this morning. He's all right. I want to be clear about that. He's not in any physical difficulty, but he told me something happened last night that I think you should know about." "What happened?" "A man came to the school yesterday afternoon, during Noah's lunch period. He spoke to Noah briefly near the front entrance before a staff member moved him along." A pause. "Noah said the man told him that his sister was involved with someone dangerous, that she didn't understand what she was getting into, that the best thing Noah could do was tell her to stop." She gripped the phone. "Noah said the man used your name," the counselor continued, "and he mentioned a specific person by name as well, a name Noah didn't recognize. He said he'd tell you tonight, but then he got anxious about it and came to me this morning." "What was Noah's name?" she asked. Meaning, was Noah mentioned by name? Yes, the man knew his name. She thanked the counselor. She hung up. She stood outside the diner with the morning traffic around her, and she felt the particular cold clarity that arrives when something crosses from abstract threat to concrete reality. Victor had gone to her brother's school. He had used Noah's name. He had made Noah afraid. She called Adrian. He picked up on the first ring. "Victor sent someone to Noah's school yesterday," she said. Her voice was very level. "A man spoke to Noah. He knew Noah's name. He told him to warn me off." The silence on the other end was not long, but it was different from any silence she'd heard from Adrian before. It was the silence of something changing irreversibly. "Are you certain?" he said. "I'm certain." "Is Noah all right?" "He's anxious. He's not hurt." She paused. "Adrian." "Yes." "We're done waiting." A beat. "Yes," he said. "We are." She left work 2 hours early. She went to Noah's school, and she sat in the counselor's office, and she talked to Noah, who was trying very hard to be calm about it, in the way he tried to be calm about things he'd decided Lily had enough to deal with. He told her what the man had said, in order precisely the way he told her things methodically, without emotional embellishment. He described the man as older, expensive clothes, the kind of person who looked like he was used to being listened to. "He wasn't threatening," Noah said carefully. "Not directly. He just said things." He looked at her. Lily, who is he? Who's the person he was talking about? She looked at her brother. She thought about all the things she hadn't told him. The careful management of information, the way she'd been parceling out only the pieces she thought he needed, the same instinct Adrian had applied to her that she'd pushed back on directly. She thought about how Noah had looked at her after the phone call in the kitchen and said, "Are you okay?" Like actually, okay. The specific intelligence of someone who knows more than he's been given permission to know. His name is Victor Salvatore, she said. He's the advisor of someone I've been spending time with. He doesn't want me in that person's life, and he's been making things difficult for me for about a week. Now he's making them difficult for people around me. The person you've been spending time with, Noah said, not a question. Adrian. Yes. Noah was quiet for a moment. Is Adrian dangerous? Yes, she said, because she was done with imprecise answers. His world is dangerous. He is not dangerous to us. I'm certain of that. How certain? As certain as I am of anything. Noah thought about that. He had the expression he got when he was turning a proof over in his head, not accepting the premise, not rejecting it, just testing it against what he knew. And the man who came here, Noah said, is he more dangerous than Adrian? I think he might be, she said, in a specific way. Because Victor is patient, and he's been building this for a long time, and he moves around things instead of through them. So what happens now? Now Adrian does what he's been preparing to do for the past week, she said. And we stay close, and we stay careful, and we don't go places alone for a little while. Stay close, Noah repeated. Close to Adrian. Close to each other first, she said. And yes, close to Adrian. Noah looked at her. Okay, he said. Okay. You're not wrong about people, he said. You have Mom's thing. The knowing. He looked at his hands. If you trust him, there's a reason for it. She looked at her brother for a long moment and felt something behind her sternum that had no name in any language she spoke. Come on, she said. Let's go home. That evening Adrian came to her apartment for the first time. He had never come inside before. The roof, the corridor, the restaurant, those were the places they existed. He had never crossed the threshold of the actual space where she lived. She opened the door, and he was standing in the hallway, and she stepped back to let him in, and he came in and stood in the small living room that had a bookshelf that was full and two chairs that didn't match, and Noah's math work spread on the table, and he looked at all of it without commenting. Noah was in his room. He came out when he heard the door. He and Adrian looked at each other. You talked to her, Noah said. Yes, Adrian said. Lily said you're handling it. I am. Noah crossed his arms. He had the body language of a much older person, something he'd developed by necessity, the posture of someone who'd had to be taken seriously before anyone was inclined to take him seriously. How? Noah Lily started. No, it's a fair question, Adrian said. He looked at Noah directly. Victor Salvatore has been operating inside my organization for 19 years. In that time, he's accumulated access to things I've trusted him with: financial structures, relationships, information. I have been building a complete picture of how he's used that access. He paused. That picture is now complete. What I have establishes that he has been diverting money, falsifying records, and building an alternative structure designed to make a move against me viable. So you have proof, Noah said. I have more than proof. I have the specific documentation that makes his position untenable with every person who matters in the network around us. What does untenable mean in this context? Noah asked. It means he loses all of it, Adrian said. Everything he's built, everything he's positioned for, every relationship he's cultivated. In one conversation with the right person, holding the right documentation. He paused. It means he has nothing left to threaten anyone with. Noah was quiet for a moment. When? He said. Tomorrow, Adrian said. Lily looked at him. He hadn't told her that. She saw him glance at her, saw the acknowledgement in the glance. I know I should have said this. I'm saying it now. And she let it go. What happens after? She said. He looked at her. Victor's done, he said. Finished. He goes away from this, from my world, from anything adjacent to it, with nothing and no leverage. It's done. He paused. And then He stopped. Started again. Then there are things I want to talk to you about. Things I've been meaning to say for a while. She held his gaze. Okay, she said. Noah, who had been watching this exchange with the evaluating expression of a person doing the math, turned around and went back to his room and closed the door quietly. Lily heard faintly the sound of him picking up his pencil. She and Adrian stood in her small living room with the mismatched chairs and the full bookshelf. Things you've been meaning to say, she said. Yes. Can you say any of them now? He looked at her. The controlled surface was there, but the underneath was closer to the surface than she'd ever seen it. The grief, and the 6 years, and the daughter who liked yellow, and the man who had built a wall and was standing on one side of it, looking at the door. I'm afraid to, he said. The honesty of it hit her somewhere she wasn't ready for. Okay, she said softly. Not afraid of you, he said quickly. Of being wrong about what's possible. Of wanting something and having it not be. He stopped. I've been wrong about what's possible before. In a very permanent way. And I decided after that to stop wanting things that could be taken. She looked at him for a long moment. That's not living, she said. That's just surviving. I know, he said. I've been doing it too, she said. For 3 years, since they died. Just keeping Noah alive and keeping the bills paid and keeping myself moving and calling that enough. He was very still. It's not enough, she said. I know it's not enough. I've known it wasn't enough and I've done it anyway because it was what was available. She paused. But it's not enough. They looked at each other in the small living room. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she agreed. He left 20 minutes later. She stood at the door and watched him go down the hall, and she stood there for a moment after he turned the corner and disappeared. Then she went to Noah's room and knocked. Yeah, he said. She opened the door. He was at his desk. He looked up. He's good, Noah said. I think. He turned his pencil in his fingers. There's something real there, underneath the whole. He gestured vaguely at the space where Adrian had been. Yeah, she said. Are you scared? He asked. She thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. Me too, he said. She looked at her brother. Get some sleep, she said. You too, he said. At 11:47 that night, Victor Salvatore received a message on his personal phone. The message was from a number he recognized, one of the people inside Adrian's network whose loyalty Victor had been quietly cultivating for years. A man Victor had believed was his. A man who had, in Victor's calculation, been feeding him information and would continue to do so, and would, when the time came, be one of the pieces Victor moved in the sequence of events he'd been planning. The message said, he has everything. The accounts, the transfers, the recordings, all of it. He's meeting with the board at 9 tomorrow morning. Victor read the message twice. He set the phone down. He sat very still. He thought about 19 years. He thought about the empire he had helped build, and the access he had accumulated, and the position he had arranged himself into with the patience of a man who had never once rushed anything in his life. He thought about a waitress who had fallen asleep in a restaurant, and a man who had caught her keys before they hit the floor. He had underestimated what that meant. He understood that now. He picked up the phone again. Not to call anyone in Adrian's world. Not to make a move in the chess game because the chess game was over. He could see that clearly. He made a different call, to a different kind of person. The kind of person you called when the chess game was over and you had decided to pick up the board. I need something arranged, he said when the line connected. Not complicated, just final. He explained what he needed. The line went quiet. Then the person on the other end said yes. Victor put the phone down. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about tomorrow, and 9 blocks away, in an apartment with a full bookshelf and 2 mismatched chairs. Lily Carter lay in the dark and thought about a man who was afraid of wanting things that could be taken, and about herself in the same category, and about how sometimes the most dangerous thing a person could do was decide that something was worth the risk. She had already decided. She had probably decided weeks ago. She was only now letting herself know it. She woke at 5:43 in the morning, not from a sound, not from a dream. From the specific alertness of a body that has been running on threat-level awareness for long enough that it has stopped waiting for alarm clocks and started waking itself on instinct. She lay still for a moment, listening to the apartment. Noah's breathing from the other room, steady, slow, the breathing of someone genuinely asleep. The street sounds below. Nothing wrong, nothing immediate, but something. She reached for her phone. No messages from Adrian. That was the first thing she checked. He had told her he was meeting with the board at 9. It was not yet 6. There would be nothing from him yet. She got up anyway. She made coffee. She stood in the kitchen and drank it slowly, and thought about the conversation they'd had the night before, the things he'd been meaning to say, and hadn't said yet, the tomorrow he'd named like a promise. She thought about Victor making a phone call to a different kind of person, which was something she didn't know about and couldn't know about, which was the particular vulnerability of being inside a situation where the things you couldn't see were the things most likely to matter. She thought about her mother, who had been precise about people, who could tell within 5 minutes who someone actually was. She tried to use that. Tried to apply it to Victor Salvatore, the man she had heard, but not seen, the man who had called her at 11 at night and spoken with the measured calm of someone who had already decided what he was going to do and was giving her the performance of offering a choice. A man who sends someone to a 17-year-old school doesn't stop. That was the thought that settled in her chest like a stone. A man who does that has already crossed a line he told himself he'd never cross. And once a person crosses that line, the next one is shorter. The distance between applying pressure and applying something worse compresses once you've established to yourself that the people around your target are legitimate territory. She put the coffee cup down. She called Adrian. It rang 4 times, then 5, then voicemail. She hung up, tried again, voicemail again. She stood in the kitchen and told herself it was 5:50 in the morning and he was probably asleep, and this was not a reason to panic. But the stone in her chest didn't move. She texted, "Call me when you're up. I need to talk to you before the meeting." She watched the screen for 2 minutes. No read receipt, no response. She put the phone down and went to get dressed. By 7:30, she had still not heard from him. She had sent 2 more texts. She had tried calling twice more. Each call went to voicemail after 4 rings, which meant the phone was on, but not being answered, which was different from a phone that was off, and which told her something she didn't want to know. She stood in the middle of her apartment, and she thought very carefully about what to do. She did not have numbers for anyone else in Adrian's world. She had never asked for them, had never wanted them, had kept the careful boundary between his world and her life with the same intentionality she'd applied to everything about this situation. In retrospect, that boundary had become a liability. She went to Noah's door and knocked. He opened it almost immediately, which meant he'd been awake. "I can't reach Adrian," she said. Noah looked at her face. He was 17 and smart enough to read what her face was doing. "How long?" "Since last night. He was supposed to meet with the board at 9. "It's not 9 yet." "Something's wrong," she said. Not because she had evidence, because she had the thing her mother had, the precision about people, and it was telling her clearly and without ambiguity that something was wrong. Noah was quiet for a moment. "The restaurant," he said. "Could you call someone at the restaurant?" "I don't have—" She stopped. She did have one number. Not at the restaurant, not someone in Adrian's world, but someone adjacent to it. The floor manager's assistant, a young woman named Petra, who had given Lily her number 3 weeks ago during the tip reconciliation situation, who had said, "Call me if you need anything," because she was the kind of person who meant that. She called Petra. Petra answered on the second ring. "Lily, it's 7:30. "I know, I'm sorry. Has anyone been at the restaurant this morning? Has anyone from management been in contact?" A pause. "Not that I know of. Why?" "Someone I know was supposed to have an early meeting. I can't reach him." She kept her voice even. "If anyone contacts the restaurant this morning about anything unusual, anything at all, will you call me immediately?" Petra's voice shifted to something more alert. "Yeah, of course. Lily, are you okay?" "I'm working on it," Lily said. "Thank you." She hung up. She looked at Noah. "I'm going to the restaurant," she said. "I'm coming with you." "Noah?" "I'm coming with you," he said again. Not a negotiation. The specific tone of a person who has decided. She looked at her brother for one moment. Then, "Get your shoes." The restaurant was locked when they arrived. This was expected at 7:45 in the morning, but the delivery entrance at the back was propped open with a brick, the way it sometimes was when the morning receiving crew was in, and Lily went in that way, Noah behind her, and went through the kitchen and out into the dining room. Empty. Silent. The morning light through the windows, the chairs still on the tables from the night before, the smell of cleaned linen, and the ghost of last night's dinner service. She stood in the middle of the empty restaurant, and she thought about the first night. The sleeping, and the waking, and the stranger watching her with the expression she'd spent 3 days trying to name. She took out her phone and called again. This time it rang once, and then went to voicemail. One ring, which meant someone had declined the call. She stared at the phone. Someone had the phone and was actively declining her calls. Her blood went cold. "Someone has his phone," she said. Noah looked at her. "Someone has his phone and is declining my calls," she said. Her voice was very steady, which was not a reflection of how she felt. "Which means either Adrian is with them voluntarily and is declining calls because he's in the middle of something, or he's not doing it himself," Noah said. Yes, she thought. She thought about Victor and the phone call to the different kind of person. She thought about what final meant in the context of a man who had been patient for 19 years and had just discovered that everything he'd built toward was about to be taken from him in a 9 o'clock meeting. A man with nothing left to lose. She thought about what a man with nothing left to lose does with the leverage he still has. She grabbed Noah's arm. "The car service Adrian arranged," she said. "The one he said he'd set up for the next 10 days. He would have given his contact information to whoever handles that. He would have a direct line to whoever manages his transportation and security." She looked at her brother. "You remember what he said last night? He said he had people on it since 2 days ago, people watching, people with contacts." "So there's someone who would know where he is," Noah said. "There has to be." She was already going through her phone looking for anything, a name, a number, anything Adrian had sent her that contained contact information. There was almost nothing he was meticulous about, not leaving trails in communication. But there was one message from 8 days ago about the transportation arrangement. He'd mentioned a name. Marcus. Just Marcus. "He mentioned someone named Marcus," she said. "He said Marcus was handling the transportation. Can you search his messages for—" "I don't have Marcus's number. Adrian always contacted me directly." She pressed her hands flat on a table. She was thinking. She was trying to think clearly while the stone in her chest was getting heavier, and her hands wanted to shake, and she was not going to let them shake. "If Adrian set up a security arrangement for me, that arrangement exists with people who work for him. People in his building, his office, something. The restaurant," Noah said. "He has an office above the restaurant. You said he used a private elevator." She looked at the private elevator at the back of the dining room. She walked to it. She pressed the call button. It opened. She looked at Noah. "Wait here. Lily. Please." She looked at him directly. "Please. I need to know you're not in the middle of this." He looked at her for a long moment. If you're not back in 20 minutes, I'm calling 911. Okay, she said. 20 minutes. She got in the elevator. The floor above the restaurant was not what she had imagined, which was mostly because she hadn't allowed herself to imagine it. It was a space that felt used, actually used, not staged. A long room with a desk that had real work on it, papers and folders, and a laptop that was open and dark. A sitting area with 2 chairs arranged toward each other, rather than toward a view, the arrangement of a place where people actually talked. Bookshelves with books that had been read, spines broken and pages marked. On the desk, face down, was a phone. She crossed the room and picked it up. It was Adrian's phone. She turned it over. The screen had a long crack across it that hadn't been there when she'd last seen it. The crack started in the upper left corner and ran diagonally, the pattern of a phone that had been dropped from height or thrown or otherwise impacted suddenly. She looked at the cracked screen for a long time. Then she looked around the room more carefully. There was a chair that had been moved. She could tell by the marks on the floor. The slight drag of something heavy shifted fast. There was a small table beside the sitting area that had been knocked slightly off its usual position, a coaster, and a glass still on it, but the glass empty and the coaster skewed. Nothing dramatic. Nothing like the violent mess of a struggle in a film. Just the small reorganizations that a real space shows when something has happened in it quickly. On the desk beside the laptop, held down by a heavy glass paperweight, was a piece of paper. She picked it up. It was handwritten. The handwriting was not Adrian's. She knew his writing from the occasional note he'd left her. This was older, more formal, the handwriting of a different generation. It said, "The meeting has been rescheduled. Bring the documentation to the location below and we discuss this privately. Come alone. You understand what happens if you involve anyone else." Below that was an address, a location in the warehouse district on the west side. Below that, Victor. She stood holding the note. She thought about the 9 o'clock meeting, the board, the documentation. Adrian had spent weeks building the complete picture of Victor's 19 years of maneuvering and diverting and positioning. Adrian would have gone to that meeting believing it was over, believing the documentation was enough, believing that the civilized resolution was available, and Victor had gotten to him first. Had gotten him here in this room and taken him somewhere and left a note for whoever came looking. For whoever came looking, knowing where to look. Which meant Victor knew about the private elevator, knew about the room above the restaurant, knew about Lily specifically, and what she would do when she couldn't reach Adrian. She was being invited. She understood that clearly. This was not an oversight. Victor had left the note here because he knew she would find it, and finding it was part of the plan. She put the note in her pocket. She went back to the elevator. She went down. Noah was standing in the middle of the dining room, exactly where she'd left him. He looked at her face when the elevator opened and his expression tightened. "What did you find?" he said. She showed him the note. He read it. "He wants you to come," Noah said. "He wants me to come alone," she said. "Lily." "I know," she said. "I know." She was already making calculations. The address was 30 minutes away. It was 8:17 in the morning. The board meeting Victor had intercepted was at 9. Victor had a window, and he knew he had a window, and he was using the window to create a situation that would give him something he could use after the meeting failed, after the documentation reached the people it was supposed to reach, and his position inside Adrian's world collapsed. What he wanted was leverage. What leverage meant in this context was her. "Call 911, she said to Noah. He blinked. "You said." "I'm changing the instruction. Call 911. Tell them there may be a person being held at..." She recited the address, "and that you want to report a concern about a person's safety. Don't use names. Don't mention anything else. Just the address and the concern." "What are you going to do?" She looked at her brother. "I'm going to go have a conversation," she said. "You're not going alone." "Noah, you are not going alone." He said it with the absolute flatness of someone who had already decided and was not revisiting it. "I'm not a child. I know what the address means, and I'm not standing in this restaurant for 20 minutes waiting to find out that you walked into something by yourself." He looked at her. "You would never let me do that." She stared at her brother. She thought about their mother, about precision, about the knowing. "You stay outside," she said. "Whatever happens inside you, stay outside, and you keep your phone in your hand, and you call anyone who answers if something sounds wrong. Are we clear?" "Clear?" he said. "Let's go." Yo. They took the subway. 31 minutes. Noah didn't say much. Neither did she. They sat side by side in the car, and Lily ran through everything she knew. Victor was a patient man who moved around things, not through them. He had spent 19 years not making direct moves, which meant this, whatever this was a departure. A man departing from his established pattern had done so because his options had narrowed, and he was operating from a compressed space. Compressed space made people either more creative or more desperate, and Victor had used up his creativity. What she was walking toward was desperation. And desperation, she knew from her own experience with it, could do things that patience and planning never would. "Talk to me," Noah said quietly. "I'm thinking." "Talk me through it. You think better out loud." She looked at him. He was right. She always had. "Victor's been planning for years to position himself to take over," she said quietly under the noise of the train. Adrian found out, built a case, was going to present it this morning. Victor found out and moved. First took Adrian somewhere to create a situation where the meeting can't happen, or where the outcome of the meeting doesn't matter because Victor has something that neutralizes it. She paused. What he has is Adrian. What he wants is a trade. What kind of trade? I don't know exactly. Maybe he wants the documentation destroyed. Maybe he wants Adrian to call off the meeting publicly. Maybe he just wants to demonstrate that he can still reach people Adrian cares about. She looked at her hands. He knows I'll come. He's counting on it. Because he thinks you're Adrian's weakness. Yes. Is he wrong? She thought about that honestly. He's wrong about what it means, she said. He thinks caring about someone makes you smaller, makes you more manageable. He's been thinking that about Adrian for 6 years. She paused. He hasn't understood that there's a difference between being someone's weakness and being someone's reason. Noah was quiet for a moment. The reason you don't fall apart, he said slowly, isn't because nothing matters. It's because something matters enough to hold on to. She looked at her brother. Yeah, she said. Exactly that. The building at the address on the note was in a block of warehouse properties that had been in the long process of being converted into other things, for years the kind of block that existed in the middle of that transition. Some units occupied, some not the whole area, carrying the specific atmosphere of a place between identities. She and Noah came up from the subway, and she looked at the block and said, "Okay, stay here. Phone out." "Lily." "Phone out," she said. "I mean it." She walked toward the address. The door to the building was unlocked. Not just unlocked, propped the way the restaurant's delivery entrance had been propped, a small, deliberate signal that she was expected. She pushed it open and went in. Inside was a wide-open space, the kind that had once held industrial equipment and now held nothing except the residue of that previous purpose. Concrete floors, high ceilings, the smell of cold and old metal. On the far side of the space there were 2 men she didn't know, standing with the posture of men who had been positioned there. Between them, seated in a chair that had been brought in specifically, was Adrian. He was upright. He was awake. He had a cut above his left eye that had dried, and the controlled expression he always wore was present, but compressed tighter than she'd seen it. When he saw her come through the door, something happened in his face. Relief and horror, arriving at the same time, fighting each other. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I know," she said. "Lily?" "I know," she said again, more firmly. To the right of the 2 men standing slightly apart was Victor Salvatore. She had built a picture of him from the phone call, from the controlled voice, from 19 years of proximity to Adrian's world, filtering in from the edges of things Adrian had told her. The picture she'd built was accurate in most ways, older, precise, the posture of someone accustomed to being listened to. What she hadn't been able to build from the voice alone was the expression. The particular expression of a man who has been certain of something for a long time and is only now beginning to suspect he has made a fundamental error. He was looking at her with that expression. "Miss Carter," he said, "thank you for coming." "You made it easy," she said. "You left good directions." He almost smiled. "I expected you to call the police." "I did. My brother called them. The address should be reaching a dispatcher right now." She held his gaze. "So we have a limited window which I expect you've already calculated. What do you want?" Victor looked at her for a long moment. He looked at Adrian. Something moved across his face, not regret, not guilt, but something in that territory. The expression of a man who is doing something he told himself he would never do, and has been watching himself do it for several days, with a growing awareness that the man he thought he was and the man he has become are no longer the same person. "I want the documentation destroyed," he said. "I want the 9 o'clock meeting canceled. I want Adrian to issue a statement to the people involved that the information he believed he had was inaccurate. And in exchange," she said, "in exchange, this ends cleanly. Everyone walks away." "That's not a trade," she said. "That's a demand. Call it what you like." She looked at Adrian. He was watching her with the expression of a man who wants to say something and knows that saying it right now would make things worse. She held his gaze for 1 second and then looked back at Victor. "I want to ask you something," she said. "All right. 19 years, she said. "You spent 19 years building something, managing things, making things run. I've heard enough to know that you were genuinely good at what you did." She paused. "Was there a point, an actual point with a date you can name, when you decided that what you'd built together wasn't enough? When you decided you needed to be the one at the center of it? Instead..." Victor was very still. "Or did it happen gradually?" she said, "the way things do, one small justification at a time, until you looked up one day and didn't recognize yourself?" Something crossed his face, something that wasn't controlled. "You don't know anything about..." "I know that you were at the hospital when his daughter died," she said. "I know you were there when his wife left. I know that you watched someone you'd worked with for years lose everything that mattered to him personally, and that somewhere in that grief you saw an opening and you started building toward it." She kept her voice even. She kept it precise, not angry, just clear. "And I know that you have spent the last 3 weeks targeting a 17-year-old boy who has a respiratory condition and more kindness in him than anyone I've ever met, and I need you to understand something about that." Victor's expression was unreadable. "That is the thing that you cannot come back from," she said. "Not with me, not with Adrian. And I think on some level you know that. Because you're not a stupid man. You're a man who made choices and kept making them, and is now standing in a warehouse at 8 in the morning with a situation that has no good ending for you. And I think you've known that since about 2 days ago, and you've been moving anyway because momentum is all you have left." Silence. Victor looked at her. Adrian was watching Victor. The 2 men who had been positioned near him had the expression of people who were processing the fact that they were not in the kind of room they'd thought they were in when they walked into it. "The police are coming," Lily said. "The documentation goes to the board at 9, regardless, because Adrian didn't only give it to one person, did you?" This last part was to Adrian, not a question. "3 people," Adrian said quietly. "Encrypted copies. Sent last night." Victor's jaw tightened. "It's done," Adrian said. He looked at Victor directly. Not with anger, she would think about this later. The absence of anger, the specific quality of what was there instead. "Victor, it's done. Not because of the documentation, not because of the board, because of what you did to a 17-year-old kid who has nothing to do with any of this." His voice was very controlled and very quiet and very certain. "That's where it ended. Right there." Victor stood for a long moment. He looked at Adrian. He looked at Lily. And something happened in his face, the specific, irrevocable collapse of a structure that has been maintained by effort for a very long time and has finally run out of effort. Not dramatic, not theatrical. Just the quiet falling apart of a man who had built his whole architecture on the idea that caring about people made you weak and was standing in the rubble of that idea. He turned to the two men. "Go," he said. They went. Victor stood alone. He reached into his jacket. Adrian's body tightened. She felt it from across the room, the alertness, the preparation. But what Victor took out was not a weapon. It was a phone. He set it on the floor in front of him. Then he took a step back. "That's everything," he said. "The copies I made of the documentation. Everything I had." He looked at Adrian. "I'm not—" He stopped. "I'm not the man I thought I was." He said it simply, without self-pity, just as a statement of fact that had arrived too late to do anything useful with. Adrian looked at him for a long moment. "No," he said. "You're not." Victor turned. He walked out the side entrance. He didn't run. He walked, with the same deliberate, unhurried quality he'd always had. But the architecture of the man who had walked in was different from the architecture of the man who walked out, and everyone in the room knew it. Lily crossed the floor. She covered the distance between the door and Adrian's chair in about 6 steps, and she stopped in front of him and looked at the cut above his eye, and the compressed expression, and the controlled posture, and she said, "Are you hurt?" "No." "You have a cut on your face. It's minor." "That's not an answer to whether you're hurt." He looked up at her. "I'm not hurt," he said. And then, "I'm sorry." "For which part?" "For not telling you last night that I'd sent the documentation to 3 people. I should have told you. You would have—" He stopped. "You would have known he'd move if he found out. You would have seen it before I did." "You would have seen it too," she said, "if you hadn't been thinking about other things." He looked at her. "What other things?" "The things you were going to say today," she said. "After the meeting." Something in his face shifted. The compression eased. Just slightly. Just enough. "You came here," he said. "Yes." "You walked into—" "I walked into a conversation," she said. Which is all it was. It could have been more than that. But it wasn't. She held his gaze. "Because Victor is not who he was trying to be. And you knew that about him, and I figured it out when I got here, and it's done." He stood up from the chair. He was slightly unsteady for a moment. She put her hand on his arm and he steadied, and he looked at her hand on his arm with the expression of someone who is still arriving at the reality of a thing. "Noah's outside," she said. "He came with you. He wouldn't stay behind." Something moved across Adrian's face that was not his usual expression. Something warmer and less guarded and more real. "Smart kid." "He gets it from our mother," she said. They walked toward the door. She still had her hand on his arm. He didn't move away from it. Outside, Noah was standing exactly where she'd left him, phone in hand, and when he saw them come out, both of them together, Adrian upright and moving, he let out a breath that had clearly been held for a considerable amount of time. He looked at the cut above Adrian's eye. He looked at Lily's hand on Adrian's arm. He said nothing about either. "Police should be here soon," Noah said. "Dispatcher asked for my name. I gave a fake one." "Good thinking," Lily said. "Is it over?" Noah asked. She looked at Adrian. "The Victor part," Adrian said. "Yes." Noah nodded. He fell in beside them. 3 of them walking. They went back to the restaurant. Not to the dining room, to the private floor, the room above the place with the desk covered in real work and the bookshelves with the broken spines. Adrian sat down. He accepted the ice, wrapped in a cloth that Lily brought from the small kitchen adjoining the room, and held it against the cut without being told to. Noah sat in one of the chairs and looked at the bookshelves with the expression of someone cataloging. "You read all of these?" Noah asked. "Most," Adrian said. "The proofs collection on the third shelf," Noah said. "Those are good." Adrian looked at the shelf. "You can have whichever ones you want." Noah looked at him. "Seriously." "I've read them." Noah looked back at the shelf with the particular expression of a person trying not to show how much they want something. Lily sat at the desk. She looked at the papers on it, the documentation Adrian had built, printed, and arranged in neat folders, the months of careful work made physical. She ran her finger along the edge of one folder without opening it. "The board meeting," she said. "It'll happen," Adrian said. "I'll call them. Tell them to proceed with the copies they received last night." He paused. "Victor will lose access to everything. The financial diversions, the relationships he built, the positions he arranged himself into." He looked at the ice in his hand. "It'll be public within our world. People will know what he did. And him personally. He walks away with nothing," Adrian said. "Which is what I would have offered him a week ago if he'd come to me." He said this without anger. Still with that quality she'd noticed in the warehouse. Not anger, not satisfaction. Something more complicated. He built 19 years of work into something that was supposed to make him indispensable, and it made him expendable instead. He stopped. "That's the cost of building your whole life around positioning yourself for something that might not come." She looked at him. She thought about the things she'd said to Noah on the subway. About reasons. About what holds. "Adrian?" she said. "Yes." "The things you were going to say," she said, "after the meeting." He was quiet. "Say them now," she said. He looked at her. The cut above his eye, the ice in his hand, the room above the restaurant where he came every night to be somewhere nobody needed anything from him. He looked at her in this room with Noah behind them, quietly examining book spines, and he set the ice down on the edge of the desk. "I've been alone for 6 years," he said. "By choice, because I decided that alone was the only arrangement that made sense. That if there was nothing to lose, there was nothing that could be taken." He held her gaze. "And I have spent the last several weeks understanding that that math is wrong. That the thing I've been protecting myself from is not loss. Loss happens regardless. The thing I've been protecting myself from is being alive." She was very still. "You argued with me the second night I saw you," he said. "You told me I don't have the right to make decisions about your life. You told me you wanted to be asked. You filed a complaint with the Department of Labor because you needed to do it yourself, not have it done for you." He paused. "You are the least manageable person I have ever met." "I'm going to take that as a compliment," she said. "It is one," he said. "It is absolutely one." His voice had changed. Something in it was unguarded in a way she had not heard it be before. "Because every person in my life before you has adjusted themselves around me, positioned themselves around me, tried to be what was useful, and you have not done any of that for one day. Not once." He paused. "You've just been exactly who you are, and you haven't apologized for it, and you've made me want to be—" He stopped. He looked at his hands. "I don't have a clean way to say this," he said. "You don't need a clean way," she said. "I want to be someone worth being near," he said. "Not someone feared, not someone positioned. I want to be—" He looked at her. "I want to do whatever the rest of this is, whatever this has been becoming. I want to do that with the door open. Not the way I've been doing it. Actually open." She looked at him for a long moment. Behind them, Noah turned a page in a book he'd taken from the shelf with the extreme care of someone who has decided not to exist for the next few minutes. "The rest of this," she said. "Yes. You should know," she said, "that the rest of this comes with a 17-year-old who will ask you extremely specific questions about your business holdings." "I know. And it comes with very little money and a lot of bills and a Department of Labor complaint that still has 6 weeks to process." "I know. And it comes with me," she said. Who will not do what's useful and will tell you when you're wrong and will not let you make decisions without asking. I know, he said. That's Lily. That's what I want. She looked at him. She thought about her mother, who had been precise about people, who could tell within 5 minutes who someone was not who they said they were. She thought about what she had known 2 weeks in that she'd been refusing to let herself say out loud. Okay, she said. He looked at her. Okay. Okay, she said again and smiled, and the smile was the real one, the one that came out without permission, the one that surprised her, the same one as the rooftop, the involuntary one that meant something had happened that she hadn't planned. He looked at her smiling, and something came into his face that she had not seen before. Not the territory adjacent to a smile, the thing itself. Unfamiliar on him, like something that had been out of practice. Real. Noah turned another page loudly. I can hear everything, by the way, he said without looking up from the book. I know, Lily said. Just wanted to note that for the record. Adrian made a sound that was improbably a laugh. A real one, short surprised, arriving without ceremony. He pressed his hand to his face over the cut and shook his head. He's going to be like this permanently, isn't he? He said. Worse, Lily said. He's currently on his best behavior. I'm really not, Noah said. But the board meeting happened at 9:17, delayed by 17 minutes, because Adrian called in from a phone borrowed from the restaurant kitchen and explained calmly that there had been a development and the meeting needed to be restructured, and he would explain in person. He explained in person. 3 people in a room, the documentation in front of them. Adrian with a cut above his eye that he explained as a minor incident, and that nobody in the room with any real knowledge of what they were looking at in the documents found surprising. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Victor Salvatore's access to everything was revoked by 10:45 in the morning. His financial positions were frozen. His relationships within the network were formally notified. The people he had thought were the man who had sent the text message the night before the others he'd cultivated over years, had in the 48 hours since Adrian had sent the encrypted copies already begun the process of recalibrating. Because loyalty inside that world had many forms, but the most durable form was not affection. It was the accurate reading of where things stood. And where things stood was clear. Victor had miscalculated. Not about Adrian, about Lily. He had thought she was the leverage point, the soft spot, the place where Adrian could be reached and broken. And he had been wrong. Not because she wasn't important, she was profoundly, but because he had made the same error about her that everyone made about her. He had looked at a 25-year-old waitress carrying too much and seen someone manageable, someone who could be pressured and threatened and pushed into a corner and used. He had not seen what Adrian had seen that first night. He had not seen someone who fell asleep from exhaustion and woke up and apologized for it, and then inside the same week confronted a manager twice her age, filed a legal complaint, recorded evidence, and walked into a warehouse because the person she cared about was inside it. He had not seen the person, only the position. And that, in the end, was why it had ended the way it ended. At noon, Lily went home. She went home alone. Adrian had the aftermath of the meeting to manage a dozen things that required his presence, and she had understood this and said go, and he had gone. Before he left in the corridor outside the room above the restaurant, he had stopped and looked at her and said, "Tonight." "Tonight," she said, and that was enough. That single word, meaning we continue this, we don't put it back, we don't return to the careful managed distance. Tonight. She rode the subway home with Noah beside her. "How do you feel?" Noah asked. She thought about it honestly. "Like someone took a very heavy coat off me," she said, "but my shoulders still remember it was there." Noah nodded like he understood exactly. "It'll take a while," he said, "to believe it." "What specifically?" "That things can be different," he said. "That something changed. That you don't have to be in the same mode you've been in for 3 years." He paused. "You've been in survival mode so long you've forgotten it's a mode. You think it's just you." She looked at her brother. "You are terrifyingly perceptive," she said. "I know," he said. "It's a burden." She laughed. The subway lurched and she grabbed the pole and she laughed in a moving car in a tunnel under New York City on a Tuesday morning, and it came out of her fully and easily and without needing to be caught or stopped or pressed back down, and Noah watched her and smiled his quiet private smile. "Better?" he said. "Yeah," she said. "Better." She looked out at the dark rushing walls of the tunnel and she thought about tonight. About a door that was open. About a man who had learned for the second time in his life what it meant to have something worth holding on to. About herself learning the same lesson. About how the heaviest coat she'd been wearing wasn't the bills, or the shifts, or the grief. It was the belief that wanting things was expensive and she couldn't afford it. She was revising that belief, starting now. She was home by 12:30. She changed out of the clothes she'd been wearing since 5:43 in the morning. The clothes she'd crossed the city in, walked into a warehouse inn, stood in front of Victor Salvatore Inn. She stood in the bathroom and washed her face, and looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been running on adrenaline since before dawn, and was now experiencing the specific crash that comes when the thing you were braced for is over, and your body doesn't know how to downshift. She also looked, she noticed, like someone who had made a decision and was living on the right side of it. She made food. Real food, not the assembled from whatever is left food she usually managed when she got home from a shift. She made eggs and toast and cut up the last of the fruit in the refrigerator, and she and Noah sat at the kitchen table and ate like two people who had earned a meal. Noah ate half his food and then put his fork down and said, "I want to tell you something." She looked at him. "I've known for a while," he said, "that you've been not okay, not in a crisis way, just not the version of you that you actually are." He looked at his plate. "Mom's version of you. The one who laughs without checking whether it's appropriate first. The one who wants things without doing the math on them immediately." She was quiet. "I didn't know how to say it," he said. "Because you were working so hard, and I was the reason you were working so hard, and it felt wrong to tell you that the working wasn't enough, that I needed the other version of you too." He looked up. "But today, on the subway when you laughed, that was her." She felt something rise behind her sternum so fast she had to press her lips together for a moment. "Noah, you don't have to say anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know that I noticed, that I've been waiting for it." He picked up his fork again. "Also that Adrian is clearly terrified of you in the specific way that means he respects you completely, which I think is the correct way to feel about you, so that's good." She stared at her brother. "Terrified?" she said. "He watches you the way people watch things they're afraid of losing," Noah said, with the calm certainty of someone who has done the math and is confident in the answer. "I noticed it in the warehouse when you were talking to Victor. He wasn't watching Victor. He was watching you." She thought about that. "Eat your eggs," she said. "Already on it," he said. "Je try." She slept for 3 hours in the afternoon. A real sleep, the first one in days, that wasn't perforated by the background alertness of sustained threat. She woke at 4 in the afternoon to a message from Adrian. "Meeting finished. Everything is in process. Are you all right?" She typed back. "I slept for 3 hours." "Good," he wrote. Then tonight, 7 o'clock. Not the restaurant. Somewhere that isn't part of any of this. She read that twice. Somewhere that isn't part of any of this. She understood what he meant. He was drawing a line between what had just happened and what came next. Between the world that had tried to swallow them both and the smaller, quieter, more human-sized world on the other side of it. "Yes," she wrote. "Where?" He sent an address. A place in the West Village she didn't know. She looked it up. A small Italian restaurant. Not the expensive theatrical kind. The real kind. The kind that had been there for 40 years and hadn't changed its menu because it didn't need to. She put the phone down. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about her mother again. Her mother had loved her father in the specific and total way that reorganizes your life around another person. And Lily had watched that love for the first 20 years of her existence and had understood it intellectually without believing it was available to her. Not because she thought she was unlovable, she had more self-respect than that, but because the practical architecture of her life left no room for that kind of reorganization. You couldn't build something that required that much structural change when the existing structure was held together with that much effort. But something had shifted. She lay on her bed, and she felt the shift honestly, without trying to manage it or qualify it. The practical architecture was still there, the bills, the shifts, the Department of Labor complaint, with 6 weeks left to run the ongoing reality of Noah's medical situation. None of that had been resolved by one morning in a warehouse. Life was not a film. The practical problems did not dissolve when the emotional ones did. But underneath the practical architecture, something had changed. A foundation thing. The belief that she had to do all of it alone in the survival mode that Noah had identified and named with the precision of someone who had been watching his sister for 3 years. That belief had cracked. Not because Adrian had fixed things, he had tried to fix things, and she had consistently refused the version of fixing that made her a recipient rather than a participant. But because he had shown up. Kept showing up. Asked instead of decided. Said, "I'm sorry," without performing it. Caught the keychain and held it like it was something precious, and sat in the empty restaurant with a quiet that felt like presence rather than absence. She was not. She understood now a person who needed rescuing. She was a person who had needed for a very long time someone to stand in the same room and not try to make her smaller. She got up at 5:30 and got ready. Noah was at the kitchen table when she came out. He looked at her. He said nothing for a moment in the way he had of processing things before commenting on them. "You look like yourself," he said finally. "Is that an observation or a compliment?" "Both," he said. He looked back at his math. "Go. I'll be fine." "I know you'll be fine," she said. "You're always fine." "I'm also always right," he said. "About most things, just for the record." She picked up her bag. She stopped at the door. "Noah." He looked up. "Thank you," she said. "For today. For coming. For not letting me go alone." He held her gaze. "You would have done the same for me." "I would have," she said. "But you didn't make me ask. You just came." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, well," he said with the studied casualness of a 17-year-old who doesn't want to be seen having a feeling. "You're my sister." She smiled. She left. The restaurant was small and warm, and smelled of garlic and good bread and the accumulated history of 40 years of real meals. She arrived at 5 minutes to 7. Adrian was already there. He was the kind of man who was always already there. She was learning who treated arriving before the agreed time as a baseline courtesy rather than a special effort. He stood when he saw her come in. She saw the cut above his eye cleaned and small now, just a line. She saw that he had changed from the morning different suit, same quality of precise understatement. She saw that he was watching her come toward him with exactly the expression Noah had described on the subway. The expression of someone watching something they're afraid of losing. She sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of them said anything. "How's the eye?" she said. "Fine." "Does it need stitches?" "It did not require stitches." "That's not the same as doesn't need them." "I had someone look at it," he said. "It's fine." "Okay," she said. She picked up the menu. She looked at it for a moment. She said without looking up, "How are you, actually?" He was quiet for a moment. "Relieved," he said. "And something else I don't have a clean word for." "Try an unclean one." He looked at her. "Lighter," he said. Which doesn't make complete sense given that today was... "It makes sense," she said. Things that have been carried too long feel lighter when you put them down, even if the putting down is hard. He looked at her. "Victor," she said. Not a question. "Victor," he confirmed. 19 years. He stopped. "I'm not sure what I feel about Victor. Not anger. I know what anger feels like, and it's not that." He turned his water glass in his hand. "Something closer to grief, which surprises me. Grieving what he could have been. What it could have been." He paused. "He was for a long time someone I trusted completely, and then he wasn't, and the transition happened so gradually that I couldn't identify the exact moment it changed, and that—" He stopped again. "That's the part that stays with me, that I didn't see it. You built something that required trust," she said. "That's not a flaw, that's just what building something looks like." "I should have." "You can always reconstruct what you should have done," she said. "That reconstruction is never accurate. You made the decisions available to you with what you knew at the time." She looked at him directly. "That's all any of us do." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're very hard on yourself," he said. "About everything practical, money, bills, Noah work. You have very high standards for your own performance." He paused. "But you're not hard on other people for being human." "I can't afford to be," she said. "I need too many people to come through for me." "That's a practical reason." "Most of my reasons are practical." "Not all of them," he said, and his voice had shifted. The same shift she'd heard in the room above the restaurant that morning, the door opening. She looked at him. "No," she said, "not all of them." The food came. They ate. They talked not about Victor, not about the morning, not about the board meeting or the documentation or the weight of the past several weeks. They talked the way they had talked on the rooftop that first night, and in the corridors, and all the evenings in between, with the specific ease of two people who have discovered that they are interesting to each other in ways that don't require performance. He told her about his father. She had not known there was a story there, and she listened without rushing it. His father had been a man of considerable force and limited warmth, a man who had built things and not asked his son whether the things he was building were things his son wanted to inherit. Adrian had inherited them anyway. Not because he was afraid of his father's disappointment by the time the inheritance came, his father was gone, but because the structures were there, and the people who depended on them were there. And he had understood at 26 years old that certain things didn't give you the option of stepping aside. "Did you ever want to," she asked, "step aside?" "Once," he said. "When Sophia was born, I thought about building a different version, something smaller and cleaner." He turned the wine glass in his hand. "I talked to Carla about it. She said the structures were too embedded, that you couldn't separate the legitimate from the rest without pulling the whole thing apart." He paused. "She was right. She was often right about structural things." He was quiet for a moment. "I stopped thinking about it after a while. And then Sophia was gone, and Carla was gone, and the thinking about alternatives went with them." "But you've been thinking about it again," she said. He looked at her. "How do you know that?" "Because of what you said this morning. About wanting to be someone worth being near, not just someone feared." She held his gaze. "You wouldn't say that if you hadn't already started doing the math." He was quiet for a moment. "The structures are still embedded," he said. "I know. It would take time, years maybe. It can't be immediate." "I know. And during that time there are realities about what my world looks like that, Adrian." She kept her voice steady and direct. "I grew up in the Bronx. I've been working since I was 16. I have a notebook full of debt calculations and a brother with a lung condition and a Department of Labor complaint with my name on it." She looked at him. "I'm not asking for the clean version. I never have been." He looked at her. "I'm asking for the honest version," she said, "which is what you've been giving me mostly when you remember to." "When I remember to," he said, with the small rueful quality that she'd come to recognize as his version of self-awareness. "You're getting better at it," she said. "I am," he agreed. "I have good motivation." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the table and smiled. The real smile, the one without permission. And he looked at the smile and produced again the thing that had been out of practice. Warm and real, and slightly uncertain, like something learning to walk again. They sat in the small Italian restaurant for 2 hours. When they left, he walked beside her, not behind her, not ahead. Beside. She noticed this without commenting on it. He had always moved in a way that made him the center of whatever space he was in, not deliberately, just as a function of being who he was in the world. Walking beside her in step with her was a different posture. A smaller one. A more honest one. At the corner where she would take the subway, he stopped. "I want to talk to you about something," he said. She stopped. "There's a building I own," he said. "On the east side. It's been sitting empty for 2 years. The original plan for it fell through." He paused. "I've been thinking about what you said, about dignity being the thing poverty can't take, about people who have nowhere to turn." He looked at her carefully. "I want to do something with that building that is useful, actually useful, not a tax arrangement, not a public relations structure, something real." He paused again. "I don't know what it looks like. I'd need someone who understands what people actually need. Not what sounds good in a proposal, but what actually matters to people who are where you were." A year ago. She was very still. "You're asking me," she said. "I'm asking you," he said, "whether you'd be interested in building something, with the building, with resources, with support." He looked at her. "Not a gift, a project, something with your name on it." She stood on the corner in the evening air, and she thought about the filing cabinet in her head, the one that had been accumulating information for 3 years about what she needed, and couldn't get what Noah needed, and couldn't get what Maria and Petra and every other person she'd worked beside needed, and couldn't get. The specific and practical shape of what was missing for people who were working as hard as they could and still running out of road. "I'd want to design it," she said, "not implement someone else's vision." "Yes. And I'd want it to actually function, not symbolically, not for optics." "Yes. And I'd want to keep my job," she said. "For now, until the Department of Labor thing is resolved and I know where I stand legally." He nodded. "Of course." "And I'd want to talk to Noah about it," she said. "He'll have ideas. He's going to want to be involved." "He's 17. He's the smartest person I know," she said. "That's not going to be less true in a year when he can be officially involved." Adrian looked at her. "All right," he said. "Yes to all of it." She looked at him. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She took the subway home. She sat in the car and she thought about a building sitting empty on the east side and what could go into that space. What kinds of services? What kinds of support? The specific population she knew best, the people who worked the closing shifts and climbed the stairs when the elevator was broken, and kept the notebooks with the careful calculations, and refused to be made smaller by the weight of what they were carrying. She thought about her mother. About what her mother would have done with a resource like that. About the precision, the knowing, the ability to see people clearly. She thought, "I have that. I can use it." She got home and Noah was still at the kitchen table. "How was it?" he said. "Good," she said. She sat down across from him. "He wants to do something with a building he owns, something that actually helps people. He's asking me to design it." Noah put his pencil down. He looked at her. "He's asking you," Noah said. "Not telling you, not offering you something that already has a shape. Asking you to build the shape." "Yes." Noah was quiet for a moment. Then, "Okay. I have some ideas." "I know you do," she said. "Write them down." He picked his pencil back up and flipped to a new page. And that was how it began. The weeks that followed moved differently than any weeks Lily had lived in 3 years, not without difficulty. Life was still life. The bills were still there, the work was still work. The practical demands of keeping 2 people housed and fed and medically managed did not step back out of courtesy for whatever was shifting emotionally. The Department of Labor investigation concluded 8 weeks after she filed landing on a Friday afternoon as a message from Martinez that said simply, "Ruling in your favor. Check your email." The settlement covered back wages for all affected staff across 14 months, not just the period she documented. Donnelly lost his management position. The restaurant changed. None of that arrived as a dramatic moment. It arrived as a Friday afternoon email that she read at the diner counter, between the breakfast rush and the lunch prep, and she sat with it for a moment, and felt the quiet satisfaction of something that had been pursued correctly, arriving correctly, and then she went back to work. She called Adrian on her break. "The labor ruling came in," she said. "I know," he said. "Martinez called." She paused. "She called you." "She called my attorney, who called me. Apparently your documentation was referenced as a model for similar cases in the borough." A pause. "She said you were thorough." "She said this is solid," Lily said. "That first call. She said this is solid in the tone of someone who doesn't say it often." "She also said that," he said. "Apparently she's been saying it to everyone she knows." Lily laughed. The sound of it was easier than it used to be, less surprising to her own ears, more like something that belonged in her chest rather than something that escaped from it. "How's the building coming?" she asked. "The architects are coming Thursday," he said. "Can you be there? I work until 3. 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock, she said. She went back to work. The architects were a firm that Adrian had worked with before, 2 women and a man all in their 30s, with the specific energy of people who were good at their work and knew it, but weren't obnoxious about it. They came to the building on the east side on a Thursday afternoon and stood in the empty space and listened. That was the thing Lily noticed first. They listened. She had half expected a presentation, a proposal, a "here's what we think this should be." Instead, they asked her to talk. So she talked. She talked about the notebook, about what it contained and what it meant. Not her specific notebook, but the category of notebook. The document that every person in a certain income bracket and a certain life situation carries, that contains the calculations they're running at all hours, the bills due and the shifts available, and the medical appointments, and the debt restructuring options, and the cost of the bus versus the cost of the subway versus the cost of the cab you take when it's 2 in the morning, and you're afraid. She talked about what wasn't available, not in an abstract systemic way. She'd sat through enough conversations that went systemic and ended in nothing but specifically. No childcare that was accessible on irregular schedules. No legal aid available on evenings and weekends when people who worked all day could actually access it. No financial counseling that wasn't either condescending or designed to funnel people toward products. No medical access that didn't require advanced scheduling that working people couldn't reliably maintain. She talked for 40 minutes. The architects took notes. Not performative notes, real notes, the kind where the pen doesn't stop moving. When she finished, one of the women said, "What do you want the person who walks in here for the first time to feel?" Lily thought about it. "Like they're not invisible," she said. "Like somebody saw them coming and thought about what they needed before they arrived." The architect nodded. They started designing. Noah came to the second meeting. He had prepared, which Lily had expected. He had a list, not a bullet point list, a paragraph list, organized by the logic of an argument rather than the logic of enumeration, and he presented it with the confidence of someone who has done the math and is certain of it and doesn't need the room's approval to know it's correct. The architects loved him. Adrian, who was present at the second meeting for the first time, sat in a folding chair against the wall and watched Noah present, and watched Lily watch Noah present, and he said almost nothing for the entire meeting. Afterward, walking out, he said to Lily quietly, "He's extraordinary." "I know," she said. "He's going to do something," Adrian said. "I don't know what, but something that matters." "Yes," she said. "He's going to need help getting there, the right school, the right program." "I know," Adrian said. And then, before she could respond, "I'd like to help with that," If you'll let me. She looked at him. Ask Noah, she said. Not me. It's his future. Adrian looked at her. You're right, he said. He talked to Noah that afternoon. She didn't listen. She went to the far end of the empty building and looked at the space and thought about what it would hold, and let the two of them have their conversation without her in it. When they came back, Noah was carrying one of the architect's sketches that someone had given him, rolled up under his arm, and his expression had the particular quality she recognized as the one he wore when he was trying not to show how much something meant to him. He asked you, she said to Noah later. He asked, Noah confirmed. He didn't, it wasn't a gift. He said if I was interested in a particular program, he knew the people running it, and he could make an introduction, and that the rest of it would be mine to earn. And I said yes. Noah looked at the rolled sketch. And then he said that he understood if I had questions about who he was and what he did, and that I could ask him anything directly. He paused. So I did. What did you ask? Everything, Noah said. I asked everything. And Noah was quiet for a moment. He answered every question, not with the version that sounds better than the truth, with the actual truth, including the parts that aren't clean. He looked at her. He said that he had spent a long time building things that were built wrong, and that he was in the process of doing it differently, and that it was slow and complicated, and that he couldn't promise clean outcomes, but he could promise honest ones. She held her brother's gaze. He sounds, Noah said carefully, like someone who has decided to be better. Yes, she said. That's exactly what he is. Good, Noah said. That's the only kind worth being around. 4 months after that first meeting with the architects, the building opened. Not with a ceremony. Lily had been clear about that from the first conversation. No ribbon cutting, no press, no public moment designed for anyone's image benefit. Just a morning when the doors opened and the services were running, and the people who needed them could walk in. She was there at 7 in the morning. She stood inside the space transformed real now, the architect's vision and her vision synthesized into something that smelled of fresh paint and good wood and possibility, and she looked at what had been built, the childcare room. Designed for irregular schedules open from 6 in the morning to midnight. The legal aid station staffed by volunteers from 2 law schools who had agreed to commit time because the problem was real and the structure was real, and the ask was specific. The financial counseling room designed to look nothing like a bank. The medical coordination desk, which did not provide medical care but provided the thing Lily had needed most often, someone to help you navigate the system. Fill out the forms. Know which number to call. Know what you were entitled to. And in the back past all of that, a small room with a coffee maker and chairs and a table. Not a meeting room. Not a program room. Just a room where someone who had been on their feet since 5 in the morning could sit down for 20 minutes and not be required to be productive. She had fought hardest for that room. Adrian had not questioned it once. She stood in the space at 7 in the morning, and the first person walked in at 7:12. A woman in her 40s in a work uniform, a name badge from a hotel on 7th Avenue, still clipped to her lapel, with the expression of someone who had passed the address several times and had finally decided to try. Lily smiled at her. "Good morning," she said. "What do you need?" The woman looked around. She was doing what Lily had done that first morning when the labor ruling came in processing, deciding, making the assessment. "I have a situation with my insurance," the woman said. "And I don't know who to call." "I know exactly who to call," Lily said. "Come in." The woman came in. That evening, Adrian came by the building as Lily was closing up. She had sent the last volunteer home 20 minutes earlier and was doing the final walkthrough herself, checking the coffee room, making sure the legal station was organized for morning, turning off lights that didn't need to stay on. He found her in the childcare room, straightening small chairs around a small table, with the particular tidiness of someone who wants the room to say something specific to the first child who comes in tomorrow. He watched her from the doorway. She straightened the last chair and turned around. How many today? He asked. 19, she said. Across all the services. Day 1, he said. Day 1. She agreed. She looked around the room. The insurance woman. She's been fighting a denied claim for 7 months. The volunteer attorney looked at her case for 20 minutes and found 2 procedural errors the insurer made that invalidate the denial. She's filing an appeal Monday. She paused. 7 months. She's been carrying that for 7 months by herself. He looked at her. She's not carrying it by herself anymore, he said. No, Lily said. She's not. They stood in the childcare room of a building that had been empty for 2 years, and was now, as of 7:12 that morning, something different. Come on, she said. I need to eat. I know a place, he said. The Italian place, she said. Or somewhere different. The Italian place, she said. I like the Italian place. He smiled. That expression that had been out of practice and was no longer out of practice. The one that arrived without announcement and without calculation. The Italian place, he said. 6 months after that, on a Tuesday in late spring, Lily went back to the restaurant where everything had started, not to work. She had left the restaurant after the labor ruling had transitioned out of the diner too, had committed herself fully to the foundation, because that was what it had formally become, a foundation, with the paperwork and the structure and the name that she and Noah had argued about for 3 weeks before landing on something that felt honest. She went back to the restaurant because there was something she needed to see. She went alone. She asked for a table in the back, not the table where she'd fallen asleep exactly, but near it. The server was a young woman she didn't recognize, hired after the management restructuring. The restaurant felt different, not dramatically, but the small differences that added up the staff moved without the compressed quality of people absorbing something they weren't allowed to name. The closing crew she could see were eating together in the kitchen at the end of the service, the sound of it low and easy. She ordered coffee. She sat in the back of the restaurant where she had worked for 3 months and climbed 7 flights of stairs and carried the notebook with the calculations and fallen asleep in a chair at 2 in the morning holding a yellow keychain. She thought about the person who had sat here then. That person was still her. She wanted to be clear about that in her own accounting. The exhaustion and the dignity and the refusal to be made smaller, those hadn't been replaced by anything. They were still there. They were what she had brought into everything that followed. The foundation existed because of that person in that chair. The building on the east side held 19 people on the first day because of that person's notebook, that person's specific knowledge of what was missing. She had not been rescued. She had been seen. And being seen had reminded her of who she already was. She heard the private elevator open. She knew the sound of it now. She looked over. Adrian came across the empty restaurant, the way he always came across spaces, quietly, precisely, with the stillness of a man who had learned early that making yourself unreadable was a survival skill, and had spent the last year learning slowly that survival wasn't the only goal. He saw her. He came to the table. He sat down across from her without saying anything for a moment. He looked at her in the context of this room, the room where he'd found her, the starting point of everything, and something moved across his face that was not his controlled expression, and was not the careful management of feeling, but was just the feeling itself, present and real and unguarded. You came back, he said. I wanted to see it, she said, without working in it, without needing something from it. She looked around the room. It looks different when you're not exhausted. How does it look? Like a restaurant, she said. Just a restaurant. He looked at her. You look different too, he said. From that night. I know. Not on the surface, he said. The same. But inside the same there's... He stopped, started differently. You looked that night like someone who had run out of road. I had, she said. You don't look like that now. I found more road, she said. He looked at her steadily. You built it, he said. You didn't find it. She held his gaze. We built it, she said. He was quiet for a moment. A real quiet, The kind she trusted, now the kind that meant he was with her in it, not absent from it. "Lily," he said. "Yes." "I need to ask you something." She waited. He reached into his jacket pocket. He set something on the table between them. She looked at it. It was a keychain. Yellow plastic. A small yellow sun, the kind that came from a vending machine for a quarter or got handed out at school fairs. Almost identical to the one he had caught from her sleeping fingers on the night that started all of this. She looked at it for a long time. "Sophia had one," she said. "Yes," he said. "I found it when I was going through things I hadn't gone through in a long time." His voice was very steady. "I've been carrying it for a month. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say with it." "What do you want to say with it?" He looked at her. The door fully open. Not held open carefully, not propped with caution. Just open. "That I'm not afraid anymore," he said. "Of wanting something that could be taken. Of being—" He stopped. "Of being alive in the way that means you can be hurt." He looked at the keychain. Sophia would have been 10 years old this year. She was going to be someone who pressed so hard on the world it went through the paper. His voice was precisely controlled, and underneath the control was something that had stopped being buried. "I don't want to close the door on that anymore. On her. On what that kind of love costs. I want to carry it forward, not put it down." She looked at him across the table. She thought about her mother, about her father, about the love that reorganized everything, and the cost it carried, and the fact that the cost was real, and the love was worth it anyway. She thought about 19 people on day one, and Noah with his pencil and rolled-up sketches, and a 17-year-old boy who had said, "You're my sister," in the tone of someone who means that as a complete answer to everything. She thought about a man who caught a keychain before it hit the floor, and held it like it was something precious, because it was. Because he already knew, without knowing he knew it, that small things carried by tired people were not small things. She reached across the table. She picked up the yellow keychain. She held it for a moment. She reached across further, and she took his hand. The hand that had caught this same kind of keychain on a night that had rearranged both of their lives, and she held it on the table between them in the back of the empty restaurant where everything had started. "I know," she said. "I know. Me too." He turned his hand over and held hers back. They sat in the restaurant. The city moved outside. The evening settled, and Adrian Morello, who had spent 6 years deciding that the closed door was safety, sat across from Lily Carter, who had spent 3 years deciding that wanting things was too expensive, and they held each other's hand in the place where they had found each other, and they were no longer people running out of road. They were people who had built more. Together. The world would keep going the way the world goes, imperfect and complicated, and full of things that don't resolve cleanly. The foundation would grow and struggle, and help people, and have hard days and good days, and days that were both. Noah would go to the program and come home changed, and be exactly who he had always been going to be. The practical problems would keep arriving, because practical problems didn't stop out of respect for anything. Life was still life, but this was the thing that was different now. The thing that had been missing and was missing no longer. There were two people who had chosen to stop surviving separately and start building together. And the thing they were building was not an empire and not a foundation, and not any structure that could be drawn on paper. It was the simpler and harder and more durable thing. The thing that Lily's mother had understood, and that Adrian's daughter had been going to understand, and that both of them had been carrying in their separate griefs all along. The knowledge that the door could stay open, that being seen was not the same as being vulnerable. That love was not the thing that made you smaller. It was the thing that finally showed you how large you had always been.